Chapter 1378. The sinkhole you saw really looked like this? Roland stood up in surprise. I'm sorry. Camilla was slightly embarrassed. My drawing skills are only at this level. The scene on the table was drawn by the butler according to Joan's memory. However, it was not comparable to Scroll and Soroya's. Even the apprentices in the art studio were far from it. The densely packed short lines were the grassland, the crooked circles were the sinkholes, the uplifted slope was the mountain, and the wavy lines represented the seawater. To an outsider, it was no different from a simple drawing and could not be used as a reference. But Roland was different. He had once seen the legendary bottomless land in his dream. It was also the end point of the Battle of Divine Will, the passage for the victorious race to advance. Even though it was eventually engulfed by tsunamis and volcanoes, and the towns built on it were all destroyed, the general topography did not change much. For example, one side was flat while the other was bulging, and the distant towering continent could be vaguely seen. Before seeing it with their own eyes, it was always an illusory legend. After all, the northern end of the Land of Dawn stretched for thousands of kilometers. The humans before the Union were unable to draw a detailed map of it, and whether it even existed was a question. From the beginning to the end, only Lon had mentioned the location of the bottomless land. And now, Joan's experience had turned it into a reality. No, this is enough. Roland could not wait to take out the large map from the bookcase and spread it on the floor in front of the table. He then placed the map in the direction of the northeast of the continent. It's probably here. What exactly is that? Camilla could not help but ask. I don't think it's a naturally formed sinkhole. Why would you think so? Roland asked. It's obvious. She crossed her arms. How can a sinkhole be so regular? And that strange seabed, the land and seawater in the sky, it's weird no matter how I look at it. Roland pondered for a moment. I feel that there's no such thing as natural. What do you mean? For example, the misty forest and grassland to the west of Neverwinter used to be a wasteland, but a bird brought seeds here and gradually evolved into what it is today. As long as enough time passes, such a hypothesis will definitely be established. However, later generations believe that this is the inherent appearance of the world. Don't you find it strange? Camilla frowned. I don't understand what you're talking about. Roland sighed inwardly. These principles were indeed too complicated for the people of the current generation. It was normal for them to be unable to understand. I see. Nightingale, who was chewing on dried fish, suddenly clapped her hands and said, What you're trying to say is that we're no different from birds and beasts, right? Is this a riddle? The butler rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache coming on. Think about it. Nightingale pointed at the city in the night outside the window and said, Birds brought seeds here and formed the forest and grassland. Humans moved to the North Slope Mountain and built Neverwinter. For this world, the essence should be the same. The so-called natural is only from our point of view. Even a bird wouldn't think that the branches of a tree are more natural than the eaves. Otherwise, why would it build its nest on the ladder? According to this inference, the circular sinkhole and the countercurrent are all part of the natural world, just like the misty forest and Neverwinter. She paused for a moment and said, Maybe the moon and stars above our heads were formed in the same way. This. Camilla was stunned for a moment. Roland raised his eyebrows in surprise. Camilla was obviously a bad student, but she was exceptionally sharp in some aspects. Should he say that it was because of her jumpy personality or because she was an idiot with a broader mind? He recalled the scene where the stones kept hitting each other and finally converged into a planet. God brought magic power to this world. From that moment on, the world had embarked on a completely different path. Let's go back to your previous question. He cleared his throat and roused Camilla from her daze. The island that Joan arrived at should be the bottomless land, and the black hole should be the pathway for the advancement of the race. When the relics of God become one, the path to heaven will appear, but it will definitely not be true liberation, nor will it win the smile of God. But we still need to go there, the bottomless land is the place closest to the divine domain. Perhaps there is a way to escape the battle of divine will. Camilla widened her eyes, as though she wanted to blurt out, "Where did you learn of these things?" but she ultimately held back. As for the floating continent, I'm guessing that it's most likely the sky-sea realm that the demons speak of. Roland turned around and picked up a pen holder, placing it west of the Land of Dawn. Due to certain reasons, a distorted spatial passageway has formed at the bottom of the shadow waters. The other end is connected to the sky-sea realm, which is why Joan was able to instantly move from the Shadow Islands to the other side of the sea. In fact, it's not just her, the bottom of the two seas are also connected. Every once in a while, large amounts of seawater will pour into the sky-sea realm, and then fall back down, forming the waterfall that Joan saw. Camilla was surprised. Could this be the reason why Thunder saw the seawater crossing the ceiling, forever flowing from high to low? I'm afraid so. He nodded. There's no need for the seawater to flow back, because the high and low sides are connected. Similarly, the rapid ebb and flow of the tides has nothing to do with the celestial bodies, and only depends on the frequency and number of passageways open. You mean, there's more than one sea region like the Shadow Islands? To make the entire Maelstrom Sea rise and fall, just one passageway is probably far from enough. As for whether there are ruins of ancient civilizations in those places, it's unknown. Roland felt the puzzle pieces in his mind coming together. And the stone tower ruins in the middle of the Shadow Islands should be looking at the sky-sea realm. Then what's the meaning of the door seen in the observation mirror? Nightingale interrupted. Perhaps only the builder knows. He shook his head. But we can boldly speculate that it might be a watchtower. The ruins have been under the water for a long time, and to be honest, it's not a good observation point. So, could it be that a long time ago, the terrain of the Shadow Islands wasn't as low as it is now, and the sky-sea realm wasn't as high? Until the Battle of Divine Will changed everything, and the Watchers and the Watched no longer exist. Only the magic-guided observation mirror still keeps a close eye on the original target, and it hasn't changed to this day. With all due respect, this is a little too unbelievable. Camilla gasped. Changing the height of 2 continents. Do you know how much this will affect the entire sea region? It could probably kill all the land creatures. Roland could not help but think of the waves that were taller than mountains. Perhaps this was the original intention of God. Of course, these are all my guesses, and you can't treat them as facts. He suppressed his distracting thoughts and changed the topic. Finally, there's the Black Continent in the northeast of the Land of Dawn. Joan saw countless sea monsters attacking it. Based on the analysis of the information obtained, it should be the territory of the demons. He walked to the top of the map and wrote the name Valkyries mentioned on the carpet with a charcoal pencil. Blackstone Region. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1379. This is what the world looks like. Camilla seemed to realize something. That's right. If you roll up the floor, it will be a map of the world. Roland put down his pen and looked at his feet in a daze. Perhaps it was a coincidence, but in history, there was a fleet that set off from the Spanish port of Barros. After sailing for 70 days and nights, they finally arrived at the New World of America, thus rewriting the map of the world. Now, Joan had used the same method to find out the general shape of the world for the first time. Although the two had different intentions, these discoveries were real. Not only would history remember Joan's name, the exploration group would also probably live up to its name because of her circumnavigating the world. But that was only in the general sense. To Roland, accurately locating the bottomless land and the sky-sea realm was undoubtedly the most important thing at the moment. Especially the former. Joan's discovery allowed him to confirm that the realm of mind was not as far away as he had imagined. This was obviously good news. At the very least, the new bomber plan and the improved Fire of Heaven had a clear goal in terms of the performance parameters. Of course, the sky-sea realm, which was located above the ocean, was somewhat beyond their reach. Fortunately, they were fighting with the demons. Even if they were to head east, they would first land on the west coast of the Land of Dawn, which was still a distance away from the fertile plains. Then there's only one question left. Nightingale scoffed. Who was the woman Joan met on the island? There are no signs of humans living there. If she's really someone from God's faction, there's no reason for them to help her, right? Roland was silent for a moment. In fact, I'm afraid that's the worst problem. Why? Camilla was puzzled. In theory, if the Battle of Divine Will ends in destruction regardless of victory or defeat, then God is our enemy. He said with some hesitation. But the Guardian did not show any hostility. Either their concept of good and evil is completely different from ours, or, they don't care about us at all. This kind of care is probably like how we bandage an injured bird. The two witches looked at each other and were momentarily stunned on the spot. But what followed was a chill that went deep into the soles of their feet. Everyone knew that if a flock of birds stole grains, humans would not hesitate to kill them, but no one would treat birds as real enemies. Occasionally, they would snatch one or two nestlings from the claws of cats. The latter had nothing to do with good or evil, it was just a personal preference. The Battle of Divine Will had gone on for many rounds, and countless races had been destroyed under the watchful eyes of the Guardians. The gods would not hesitate at all when it came to the survival of civilizations. Although they had saved Joan, it did not mean that humans were a special kind of race. This is too scary, Camilla Derry murmured. I hope I'm wrong. Roland sighed. But since we're going to stop the Battle of Divine Will, I'm afraid we won't be able to escape God's wrath. This is the price. Stop your foolishness. You have no idea what you are doing. Everything will return to nothingness. Millions of years of accumulation will also be destroyed. You can't afford such a crime, every single sentence echoed in his ears like a miniature version of time. He had paid such a price to keep the Battle of Divine Will going. How could he stop it so easily? Whether in reality or in the dream world, this struggle was inevitable. At the Sedimentation Bay Pier in the Kingdom of Wolfheart. This place had once been occupied by demons, and the densely packed residential area was now a wreckage. However, as the First Army was gradually equipped with weapons, and the demons were caught unprepared by the attack of trucks and cannons, the demons were forced to retreat from the port city in just 1 month. The mist storage tower in the square, which had been smashed by the stronghold's cannons, was proof of this. The demons had driven humans to transport pieces of neatly cut obsidian from the north, and the inferior demons, who did not need the red mist, piled them up into towers until they connected with the towers in other cities, forming a dreadful area of dense mist. However, before this plan could be realized, the half-built mist storage tower had already collapsed in the roar of cannons. As the humans gradually launched a counterattack, the demons' control over their territory was visibly declining, and the once extinct fugitives showed signs of recovery. Even though the city was dead, the port became busy again. Even though the demons had destroyed most of the roads and bridges before they retreated, the construction team was still able to build temporary roads within a week. For those who had escaped the red mist with great difficulty, this was undoubtedly a fortunate thing. However, not everyone who fled to the south thought so. Damn it, the rumors were actually true. Negan Murray said hatefully as he looked at the checkpoints set up on the road. I had wanted the demons to deal with the troublesome people of Greycastle, but I didn't expect them to be so unreliable. Both sides are monsters, just that one side is more savage, Talos Murray replied expressionlessly. Half of his face was hidden under his bandana, and several scars extended from the shadows, like earthworms entrenched under his skin. However, without the support of the nobles, the Wimbledon family will lose everything they have sooner or later. We don't have to worry about that. At this point, he looked at the people queuing up, and his tone became more sinister. We have enough people to deal with, that's true. Negan was also excited. Anyone who defers to Greycastle is our enemy. We have to make them pay a price. But we have to endure it for now. Talos pressed on his shoulder. Once dawn arrives, we can hunt however we want. Even though the demons would never mention their defeat, it was an indisputable fact that the number of monsters stationed in Everwinter was decreasing. Compared to the ignorant commoners, the nobles could always find out news from the front lines if they wanted to. After knowing that the demons from hell were no match for the people of Grey Castle, panic had already spread among the nobles. As a knight, Talos did not have as many burdens as the nobles. He was not willing to risk his life for these ugly races, and it was even more impossible for him to defer to Grey Castle, who had a grudge against him. Since there was no way out in Everwinter, it was wiser for him to head south to the territories that the people of Grey Castle had yet to take control of. Of course, things like hunting refugees could be done anywhere. He still had a lot of time to take revenge, or rather, enjoy himself. Unknowingly, he had fallen in love with the feeling of being in control of everything. Listening to the refugees beg for mercy, roll around, and wail under the hooves of the horses was simply irresistible. Every time he bathed in the warm fresh blood, even the old wounds on his face would fade a lot, as if they were responding to this sacrifice. Since it was impossible to revive his family, he might as well enjoy the hard-earned pleasure. And there was nothing more worth looking forward to in this world. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1380. Name? Where are you from? Nolan, this is my older brother, Bunos. We're from Icebound Town. Negan replied casually in response to the checkpoint inspector's question. Even though the two of them had heard that it was best to tell the truth to the inspector of Grey Castle before they reached the sedimentation bay, or else they might run into trouble once they reached the south, they had no intention of going to Grey Castle from the start. Once they passed through Cage Mountain, they would be in the territory of the Kingdom of Dawn. There were many villages and towns there that they could hide in. With their strength, the two of them did not have to worry about their future. Thus, compared to nobles, they would be less conspicuous if they disguised themselves as commoners. They had even discussed beforehand that they could work as guards or patrols for the Lord. They would have a dignified identity during the day and freedom at night. As long as they guarded the deserted roads, they would not have to worry about not being able to find a lone fugitive. It was the same as what they did in Everwinter. Oh. That place is quite far from the sedimentation bay, the inspector said as he recorded. Did the news of the demons' defeat spread so quickly? Among the fugitives, there aren't many northerners like you. Negan was slightly surprised. From the other party's appearance and attire, he was clearly a normal person, and most of the normal people he had seen were only familiar with the place they lived in. The word experienced and knowledgeable had nothing to do with them. But not only did this person from Grey Castle know of Icebound Town, he even knew the distance to this unknown town. Is that so? I heard it from a merchant friend. Not long from now, there will probably be more people coming from Everwinter, right? As he answered, he secretly rejoiced that the town they chose was not far from the kingdom of Wolfheart. If it was Snow Reflection Castle in the north of Everwinter, it would probably arouse suspicion. I hope so. The inspector looked at Taros. By the way, can you lift up your brother's scarf? He was scratched by a wild beast before, it's not convenient to show it to others. I'm sorry, but this is the rule. If there are any obvious characteristics, I have to write it down in the report. Negan frowned. Damn it, he's just a watchdog. My brother is an official knight. If they were in the wild, he would definitely pull out this guy's tongue. Well, it's no big deal, Talos said coldly. I just took a look. He lifted his scarf, revealing half of his twisted face. The inspector couldn't help but take a step back, probably because it was too horrifying, and the surrounding people all gasped. Even so, the people of Grey Castle persistently completed the record. Then, this is your nameplate, he handed the 2 metal plates to Negan. It's the only proof to exchange for your new identity. Remember not to lose it. Now go to the holding area and wait. This guy was scared. Negan received the nameplate and sneered in his heart. The eldest brother's expression seemed calm, but in fact, he already had the intention to kill. This kind of aura that was tempered through fighting with the sword was not something that a commoner could bear. In addition to his current ferocious appearance, his deterrence increased by several folds. It was already an outstanding performance that the other party did not fall to the ground on his butt. Unfortunately, this was not the place to cause a ruckus. There were soldiers of Grey Castle guarding the sentry post, and no matter how powerful they were, it would be difficult for them to evade the invisible crossbows. Let's go. Talos put down his scarf and nodded. Yes. Negan pushed through the crowd and took the lead to enter the port. But very quickly, his footsteps slowed down. Brother, they're going to transport everyone away. Talos also noticed the arrangements of the people of Grey Castle. Their original plan of getting past the checkpoint and finding a chance to act on their own sounded good, but the other party did not give the refugees the chance to disperse. From the sentry post to the detention area, it was basically surrounded by brightly colored cloth strips. As long as the seemingly scattered refugees followed the cloth strips, they would definitely be led to the dock and board the large ships docked by the shore. Although the cloth did not have any restrictive effects, the patrolling soldiers of Grey Castle had them. They were loitering around the streets, and if the two of them crossed the cloth and left the crowd, those fellows would definitely not ignore them. And the biggest difference from what they had imagined was undoubtedly the city itself. The core area of the sedimentation bay was in ruins. Not to mention the residents, not even a single intact house could be found. This not only made it impossible for them to blend in with the locals, it also made it extremely difficult for them to hide their tracks. This was completely different from the Everwinter Kingdom. Even though they were both occupied by the demons, be it Snow Reflection Castle or the other cities, they were all basically intact. Who would have thought that in the south, it would be completely different? What should we do? Negan could not help but reveal a trace of anxiety. Once they boarded the ship, they could only resign themselves to fate. If they headed straight for Grey Castle, wouldn't they have nowhere to escape to? Staying in the same place was obviously not a solution. To the refugees, they all hoped to leave the territory of the demons as soon as possible. If they took a single step forward, they would also be targeted by the patrolling soldiers. You were too impatient, that's why you weren't conferred a title by His Majesty. Talos exhaled. Walk slowly, don't stop. The docks are so big, it's impossible for the people of Grey Castle to be flawless. Just look at their numbers, there are at most 100 of them. As long as we look carefully, we will definitely have a chance to escape. Hearing his brother say this, Negan gradually calmed down. No matter how crazy his elder brother was when he killed, he was as calm as ice when he enjoyed victory. As long as they followed his instructions, there was no obstacle that they could not overcome. After a quarter of an hour, Negan found an opportunity. "Brother, look over there," he exclaimed in a low voice. "Unbelievable." Talos observed for a while and nodded in agreement. I have to say, the people of Grey Castle are indeed extraordinary when it comes to unorthodox means. They can even transport carriages to such an extent. At a corner of the docks, there were more than 10 four-wheeled carriages. Their size was astonishing, and the goods they carried were not something an ordinary carriage could compare to. The food and other resources that the refugees needed were all provided by them. At least, there were many porters shuttling between the docks and the carriages, transporting bags of goods to the ships. The number of people there was more chaotic, and it overlapped with the detention area, so it was not too difficult to approach the carriages. However, even if they reached the carriages, it did not mean that they could escape from the area controlled by the people of Grey Castle. Unless they could outrun the firearms, they would be caught by the patrolling soldiers sooner or later. The only feasible method was to escape by hijacking the carriages. Although these four-wheeled carriages were huge, they still needed people to drive them. Furthermore, unlike the carriages, the drivers seemed to be wrapped around the front of the carriages. In other words, they had the opportunity to hijack the driver while ensuring that they were not discovered. Negan and Talos looked at each other, instantly confirming the thoughts in each other's minds. Using the huge carriages as cover, they found the carriages that were preparing to leave, and then pointed the dagger at the driver's throat. The rest would be easy. The two of them immediately moved. The entire process could be said to be daunting, but not dangerous. Although there were many porters who noticed the two of them walking further and further away, they would at most point out the direction to board the ships. No one came forward to question them. They also acted as if they were attracted by the huge carriages, easily deceiving the busy crowd. After all, everyone had their own things to do, and no one was willing to cause trouble. Once they entered the blind spot, Negan and Talos quickly bent down, sticking close to the carriages as they ran. Very quickly, they closed in on the carriages that had been loaded and unloaded. They were just one step away from the success of their plan. At this moment, a curious voice suddenly sounded from behind them. "Who are you?" Negan instantly felt his hair stand on end. He abruptly turned his head, only to see that a cloaked woman had appeared behind him without him noticing. The other party tilted her head, and the drooping hood covered most of her face. He reached for his waist, but was secretly stopped by Talos. "My apologies. We are refugees from Icebound Town. We wanted to get closer to take a look at these amazing creations, but we did not expect to walk all the way here." "I see, refugees, huh?" The woman smiled, but had no intention of leaving. "But, why is there such a thick stench of blood on your bodies?" Vertex M. Chapter 1381. "What are you talking about?" Negan said impatiently. "The smell of blood. Do you think you're a dog? What is this fellow talking about? He doesn't seem to be in his right mind at all." His tone carried a hint of mockery. Most people would not speak to a stranger they met for the first time in such a manner. If it were any other time, he would be interested in playing with her, but now that escaping from the sedimentation bay was his top priority, the best way to deal with an idiot was to make her shut up. Negan increased the strength on his wrist to convey his thoughts to his elder brother. But the latter did not let go. "I think, you're probably mistaken. This used to be a port. It's not uncommon to kill and dry fish here. The difference between human blood and the smell of fish is like the difference between heaven and earth." The lady was unmoved. If there was only one smell, it could be explained by wounds. But the smell of blood on your bodies is too much and too mixed, it's hard to ignore. Some are old, probably a few months old, while some are new, at most 2 or 3 days old. They're currently coming out from under your clothes. Under my clothes? Negan could not help but be stunned. To most knight, a set of light and sturdy armor was the most precious asset. If carefully maintained, it could be passed down for many generations. It was the same for the Murray family. They had abandoned the desolate land of Everwinter, but they did not abandon their armor and weapons. In order not to be noticed, the two of them wore large coats and robes. Since it was winter, it was not unusual for them to wear thick clothing. Only when it was time to kill for fun would they go into battle lightly. Other than being more agile, they did not have to worry about blood staining their clothes. After the battle, they only needed to wipe the blood off their armor, and the grease that soaked the armor could also maintain it. But this should not have been discovered by anyone, so how did the other party know? Could it be that she really sniffed it out? Negan's heart was suddenly filled with unease. At the same time, the hand that was pressing down on him suddenly loosened. All he saw was a flash before his eyes, and Talos' figure had already rushed in front of the lady. His elder brother did not draw his weapon. For someone who had trained for a long time, fists, palms, and joints were enough to kill. The speed of this attack could be said to be as fast as lightning. From the moment he took a step to the moment he attacked, it was only a blink of an eye. If he was the target, it would be very difficult for him to react. In terms of ability and skill, his eldest brother was definitely one of the best knight of Everwinter. Regardless of whether the other party was an idiot, a madman, or someone with an extraordinary sense of smell, he was already a dead man. However, the sound of the throat bone being crushed did not come. He only heard 2 soft, peng sounds. The woman raised her elbow and pried away the iron arm that was reaching for her throat. Then, she single-handedly received Taros's left punch. Negan's eyes almost popped out of his head. How was this possible? Putting aside fighting techniques, just the difference in strength between a man and a woman was enough to determine everything. Moreover, his elder brother was known for his great strength, and it was the first time he had seen someone receive his attack with one hand. In the blink of an eye, the two had exchanged several blows, but Talos was still unable to kill his opponent with a single blow. When they separated again, he finally tore off his robe and pulled out his dagger. "Brother, let's go together." There was a hint of urgency in this low voice. Only then did Negan realize that as a knight's elder brother, he had already made the judgment that he could not defeat his opponent by himself. "Who exactly are you?" He gritted his teeth and pulled out his dagger, bending down beside Taros. "Who I am isn't important. What's important is that you don't seem to be ordinary refugees. Then, there's a need to explain the reason for your lies." The woman spread out her hands, as though indicating that it was not a problem even if she was empty-handed. "If you surrender now, you might suffer less. However, murder is a serious crime. According to the laws of Grey Castle, once the blood on your body is confirmed to be from an innocent person, the only ending for you is death. This person is crazy." She seemed to be persuading them, but every action and every word she said was forcing them into a dead end. Who would place a dead end in front of them from the very beginning? Since they knew that they would die, it was impossible for them to surrender without putting up a fight. In other words, the other party was forcing them to make a move. There was no point in saying anything more. When Taros stabbed forward with his dagger, Negan followed closely behind, suppressing the woman's space to evade. At the same time, it was to prevent her from turning around and escaping. However, the other party did not seem to have any intention of escaping. Not only that, she did not even attempt to shout for help. She leaped forward and engaged them in combat. Only after experiencing it personally did Negan understand how terrifying the other party was. Every strike of hers was heavy and powerful, requiring the strength of one's entire body to resist. Even if it was a seemingly light block, one had to firmly grasp the handle of the dagger, or else the weapon would be easily knocked away. He could not imagine how the other party's body could contain such frightening strength. "Don't hold back, she doesn't pose a threat to us." Taro's low roar jolted Negan back to his senses. That's right, they were wearing armor, and the other party did not have any sharp blades in her hands. There was no need to use conventional methods. Even if he took one or two punches, it would not be a big deal. Exchanging injuries for injuries would only be beneficial to them. He threw the dagger at the woman, and after being easily dodged, he opened his arms and pounced towards the target. Under normal circumstances, this would undoubtedly be suicidal. But with just her fists and legs, what could she do to him? Following that, an intense pain exploded on Negan's face. He felt his nose sinking into his bones, and his throat was filled with the taste of rust. His vision suddenly became blurry. "Damn it, it hurts, but you're finished." He gritted his teeth and used all his strength to close his arms. The range was far larger than the dagger, and if he was hugged, he would definitely die. If he wanted to dodge, he would have to destroy his current defensive stance, and in the process, he would definitely reveal a flaw. He believed that his brother would definitely grasp this opportunity. Indeed, due to the excessive movement of dodging, the woman's entire body collapsed. Evidently, she no longer had the strength to stop her brother's next step. Taros took a step forward and swung his sword upwards. A gray light slashed diagonally into the woman's head. The latter's head flew upwards, as though it had been struck by a venomous snake's tongue. Before he had the time to heave a sigh of relief, the woman who had fallen backwards did not scream out as he had expected, nor did she fall to the ground with her hands covering her face. Instead, she used the momentum of her body to kick out twice, sending him and Taros flying. Negan even felt that it was not a kick, but a battering ram. With a loud bang, he crashed into the four-wheeled vehicle behind him. The armor on his body was unable to withstand the pincer attack, and the force that entered his body caused him to spit out a mouthful of blood. After landing on the ground, the woman regained her balance, and the hood on her head slid down, revealing her smooth long hair and a pair of pointy furry ears. The only thing he did not see was the wound that he had expected. Negan's heart instantly sank to the bottom. That strike that seemed to have struck the woman's head was merely an illusion brought about by the long brim of the hood. The only thing that his brother had sliced open was the woman's hood. And those inhuman ears, cough cough. You ugly monster. Taros clutched his chest as he slowly stood up. I'm clearly wearing the god's stone of retaliation, how could you not be affected? Because I didn't use my ability. The woman touched her hood regretfully. As for you saying that I'm ugly, that's just because you have a low level of appreciation. The people of Neverwinter don't think so, and the chief even praised me. That's simply a load of nonsense. Negan coughed out a mouthful of blood. My brother is a knight conferred by the Queen of Everwinter. Even in the King's City Knight Regiment, not many can defeat him. If not for your evil ability, do you think you can defeat my elder brother? Dream on. Is that so? Perhaps you haven't realized the changes that have happened to your body. The woman's face darkened. Let me ask you, the blood on your body, did it come from opponents of equal strength? What are you trying to say? I don't think so. Although your attacks are ruthless, you lack a sense of sharpness, and the will to fight to the death. She said slowly. I've seen too many people like you. Once you've obtained some achievements, you are unwilling to take another step forward. You only dare to turn around and bully the weak in order to maintain your position. Over time, this spirit will seep into your bones and be remembered by your body. No matter how many victories you obtain, it won't make you stronger. And among the opponents I've faced, there are transcendents who are so strong that they make others despair, and there are also ancient witches who are proficient in various martial arts. This is the difference. Perhaps you guys did possess extraordinary strength in the past, but now. She paused. You can no longer be considered powerful. Vertex M. Chapter 1382. They were the weaklings. When this thought appeared, Negan was completely stunned on the spot. He subconsciously thought that it was nonsense, but reality mercilessly reminded him that even with weapons in hand and 2 against 1, it was impossible to defeat the other party. They hated Roland Wimbledon, hated the people of Greycastle, and hated firearms even more. It was precisely because of these unreasonable things that allowed a lowly commoner to threaten the knight who had trained hard for more than a decade. Those lowly commoners should have prostrated at their feet and relied on their protection to survive. This was the tradition that had lasted for thousands of years, the order that the world recognized. If firearms did not exist, his brother and he would still be the invincible warriors of the past. But not only did the woman in front of him not use firearms, she did not even have a weapon. They had lost to her in the aspect that they were most confident in. This inconceivable truth and belief collided, causing him to be momentarily dazed. As expected of a witch, she's best at deceiving people with lies. Using strength to win. Don't make me laugh. Talos took 2 deep breaths. You merely used the power of impurity to pollute my god's stone. Cough cough, if the Church of Hermes was still around, how would you dare to show yourselves here? Other than the tradition-defying king of Greycastle, you are the ones who should go to hell. Bullshit. A man's voice suddenly cut in from the front of the carriage. I am a member of the church. I have driven dozens of witches, if not hundreds. Not only did they show themselves, they even praised my driving. Furthermore, the past and present leaders of the church are all witches, and you're talking to me about tradition? This is the F***king tradition. Negan and Talos could not help but look at each other. This was obviously the coachman speaking. There was always a way out. They had to kidnap the coachman and leave this place first. Only then would they have the chance to take revenge. As long as there was someone to stall this she-wolf, it would be fine. Comparing the strength of the two, it was naturally better for the stronger brother to do the job. But before Negan could speak, Talos suddenly grabbed him and threw him towards the she-wolf with a loud shout. Bro! He watched in disbelief as the man turned around and ran towards the front of the car, leaving behind only a silhouette that quickly left. The woman mercilessly slapped him to the ground, and then kicked his head. The hammer-like blow made his vision go black, and he quickly lost consciousness. Just as his thoughts of shock and despair were interrupted, he vaguely heard a whisper coming from above his head. "The people over there aren't people you can deal with." The distance of more than 10 steps was covered in the blink of an eye. Just as Taros was about to reach the driver's seat, a figure suddenly walked out from behind the car. That person was also a woman, wearing a dark gray uniform. Just as they had observed earlier, she was dressed like a four-wheeled carriage driver. So there were 2 coachmen for each carriage. This person couldn't possibly be a witch, right? Since he was just an ordinary person, 1 or 2 of them wouldn't make a difference. Or rather, it would be enough to have 1 driver for him. Compared to the man who shouted, the woman was obviously easier to control. Taros intended to capture him first before stabbing the guy who dared to refute him. As for the iron rod in the female coachman's hand, he didn't even put it in his eyes. Reaching out to pull off his scarf, he roared at the other party. As he ran, he raised his dagger, intending to intimidate the woman before pressing the dagger against her neck to threaten her into submission. But what surprised Taros was that the other party's expression was as calm as water, without a single ripple, as though she had turned a blind eye to his ferocious appearance. And what surprised him even more was what happened next. The female coachman's body tilted slightly, her hands holding the iron rod above her head. It was obviously a chopping stance. This person actually knows swordsmanship. Just as the thought popped up in his mind, the other party had already taken a step forward and swung the iron rod in her hand. Damn it! This kind of bold move was completely risking one's life. In the eyes of a layman, it was no different from courting death. But to Taros, this strike had the power of a mountain. And the iron rod with a fork at the front seemed to have expanded dozens of times, covering all of his movements. Everything happened too fast. He was running at full speed and had no room to dodge. If he maintained his posture, he might be able to stab the tip of the dagger into her neck, but the rod would undoubtedly split his head open. It was simply unreasonable. Taros realized that his body reacted faster than his mind. He hastily turned the dagger around and raised his hands horizontally above his head, trying to block the blow. Break! The woman's iron rod smashed into the center of the dagger. Under the tremendous force, the dagger's curve quickly exceeded its limit, and with a bang, it shattered. But the momentum of the rod did not diminish, and with sparks and splashes of metal, it smashed straight into his face. How could this be? Taros only heard a loud bang in his ears, and before he could even make a sound, he fell stiffly to the ground, his body twitching non-stop. But that was his body's automatic reaction, and his consciousness had long fallen into a coma. Is it over? Charles cautiously poked his head out of the car window. Yes, if he had chosen to stab me to the end, maybe he could have fought a few more rounds. Farina flicked the blood stains on the wrench. If he had retreated at the last minute, 1 blow would have been enough. Of course, your bait was also crucial. Well done. Charles smirked. Don't forget that I was once a noble, and nobles are best at scolding people. I guarantee you won't repeat a single word in 100 sentences. Farina raised her head and looked at the person she needed. You're obviously a noble, but you're so different from them. Sometimes I often fall into confusion. Why is there such a huge difference between people? Is this also the intention of the creator? You're also very different. Charles slightly shifted his gaze, but quickly looked straight back at her. That's why I'm so attracted to you. Charles, Farina, I'm sorry, Lorgar interrupted the two's eye contact. Is that man dead? The werewolf girl carried the unconscious assailant to the front of the car and threw him on the body of another person. Ah. I think he's still breathing, Farina replied. You knew we were coming? Lorgar nodded. I heard your footsteps. Not only did you notice the noise here, but you also quickly decided on a strategy. You're indeed the former captain of the Judgment Army. After fighting with you, they basically lost their fighting spirit. I just took advantage of the situation. Farina smiled. What you said just now is quite reasonable. If there's a chance in the future, can I also fight with you? Lorger's ears twitched, of course, or in other words, I'm more than happy to. It's not too late to talk about it later, Charles sighed. Now the problem is, what should we do with these two guys? Let the First Army control them and interrogate them first. Since they can wear armor, they're obviously not ordinary refugees, Lorger said indifferently. As for how to deal with them later, let them decide. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1383. Kingdom of Everwinter. My lord. Lord Marwain. Someone nudged his arm. Marwain opened his eyes impatiently. It took a while for his blurry vision to come back together, and the familiar face of the old butler appeared in his eyes. Burp, why is it you again? He struggled to prop himself up and accidentally knocked over a few bottles of wine on the low table. One of them fell to the ground with a loud clang. This voice also brought him back to his senses. What followed was a hangover headache. That's right, he had forced a few girls to drink with him last night. It was around 4 or 5 in the morning, and he had fallen asleep on the couch. Marwain squinted his eyes and glanced at the couch beside him. It was covered with all kinds of alcohol and other liquids, and it gave off an unpleasant sour smell after being baked in the fireplace for a night. As for the girls, they had already disappeared. It was obvious that they were still lacking in the aspect of serving others. Damn it, how did I fall asleep on this thing yesterday? Let's burn it. Marwain wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth and changed to a more comfortable sitting position to relieve his headache. So, my dear butler, what bad news do you have for me today? Which knight has run away, or has Greycastle entered the kingdom of Everwinter? You flatter me, my lord. The butler bowed even lower. He was the one who came up with the idea to attack the Greycastle team, and he did not want his master to shift the blame to himself. Greycastle is still fighting the demons in the kingdom of Wolfheart. They won't be able to reach the kingdom of Everwinter in the near future. Please rest assured. Ha, but isn't it only a matter of time? Marwain interrupted. The stench of alcohol in his mouth was a little pungent. The demons haven't increased their forces, and even that Sky Lord is nowhere to be seen. Anyone with eyes can see that the situation has changed. What's the point of you comforting me? No, my lord. Listen to me. Marwain growled. I know what you're trying to say. Please pull yourself together and don't give up. But you saw it for yourself that day. They had the same weapons, but Greycastle still defeated our men. What does that mean? The gap was not with the nobles, but with the subordinates and people at the bottom. They dared to face the muskets head-on, but what about our men? You only know how to run like a rat. How many people are left in the kingdom of eternal winter? Viscount Narnos? No, his current territory was already comparable to accounts. Duke Remy? Most of his family business was in Everwinter, so he couldn't leave even if he wanted to. And this family, that family. Indeed, the great aristocratic families were still here, but did they not want to leave? No. At this point, his tone suddenly became high-pitched. They can't leave. He didn't want to burn the family property that he had accumulated for several generations and start from nothing. As long as there was a way, they wouldn't sit still and wait for death. However, those knights that I invited here would not have such concerns. A title deed is not binding at all. These people could leave with the title deed and come back after the war subsides. Therefore, I could only refuse to meet them and invite them to stay by holding a banquet. This isn't giving up, and it's not escaping. Do you understand? Marwain picked up a bottle of wine and gulped down a mouthful. Once I fulfill my promise, they will immediately leave. Since my subordinates and people can't compare to Greycastle, the only thing I can rely on is the demons. As long as they can defeat Roland Wimbledon, these people will settle down again. When the time comes, I can reissue the title deed, and these knights will become my greatest help. My lord. I know, but I have to inform you. God, shut up, you don't know. Marwain's voice had a slight tremble. You think I'm weak, useless, and only knows how to drink all day, but that's not the case. My strategy isn't wrong, it's the demons who lost. Even they can't defeat the people of Grey Castle, what's the point of me pulling myself together? It's fine if the others leave, but even Fuller, whom I thought highly of, left. What's the point of me becoming the king of Everwinter? I might as well drink more wine. After all, I won't be able to drink it in the future. So from today onwards, you don't have to tell me any bad news. Just keep it to yourself. Prepare some good wine for me tonight. I remember there's still a lot of it in the underground storehouse, right? Now, get out. With that, Marwain covered his face with his hands and lay back down on the couch. My lord, what I wanted to say is that the Sky Lord is currently waiting in the castle's parlor. He says he has a new decree for you. The butler finally found an opportunity to speak and hurriedly said it in one breath. What? What did you say? Marwain sat up abruptly. The Sky Lord is here. Why didn't you inform me earlier? Prepare a basin of hot water for me, I'll go over after I wash my face. There's no need. Suddenly, a deep voice came from the door. The two of them were stunned and turned to look, only to see a tall, blue-skinned figure pushing open the door and striding in. It was Haxord. He scanned the messy furnishings and empty wine bottles in the room and revealed an undisguised look of contempt. I thought you were tied up by something important, but it seems like I've wronged you. Why, do you think the outcome of this war has been decided? Damn it, he heard me complaining. Marwain hurriedly knelt down on one knee and even wanted to slap himself. No, my lord, I'm just, considering your level of knowledge, I can forgive you this time. But don't do it again, or else I'll pull out your tongue. Haxord said coldly, the enemy's performance in the early stages has indeed exceeded our expectations, but that's only in the early stages. In fact, their good days have already come to an end. Not only the kingdom of Wolfheart, but the kingdom of Dawn and Grey Castle will soon be engulfed in the flames of war. This is the fate of those who resist. Your Excellency, may I ask, is this true? Marwain asked doubtfully. He had originally thought that the Everwinter continent was doomed, and he wanted to seek shelter from the Grand Lord. However, from what the other party had said, the situation wasn't too bad. At the very least, it wasn't to the point of no return. Since they also thought that Grey Castle was weak, the credibility of Haxord's words was questionable. Haxord sneered. It's understandable that you have doubts, but after you witness the power of my race, I believe you'll understand the weight of my words. With that, he raised his hand and opened a door that emitted a strange purple light. Follow me. Marwain swallowed his saliva and braced himself to enter the door. On the other side of the door was another hall. He was surprised to see many familiar faces, such as Narnos and Remy. Clearly, the Sky Lord had gathered most of the nobles in the kingdom of Everwinter. Before he could ask about the situation, the senior demon lord opened a new teleportation door. Haxord's intentions were self-evident. The nobles looked at each other and finally lined up to enter the door. This trip took nearly a day. Marwain couldn't remember how many teleportation doors he had passed through. The scenery around him was sometimes a cave, sometimes a mountain ridge. The deeper he went, the more uneasy he felt. Even though he knew that the demons didn't need to spend so much effort to kill him, such an unknown and forceful teleportation always made him fearful. When night fell, the nobles finally arrived at their destination. When the last door slowly disappeared behind them, Marwain Parker's eyes suddenly widened. He saw a miracle. That's right, even if he exhausted all the words he had, he couldn't accurately describe what he had seen. Other than a miracle, he couldn't think of any other way to describe it. The other nobles weren't any better. All of them were tongue-tied and couldn't utter a complete sentence. Now, you've seen it, Haxord said expressionlessly. Baidu search 881 Chinese network yen. No advertising message. Chapter 1384. The senior lord's words were not empty words, it was not something humans could achieve. Marwain could not imagine how the people of Grey Castle would deal with such a miracle. Apart from looking up, the only thing they could do was pray. The demons would definitely win the war. He no longer had any doubts. The disappointment and fear from before were swept away and replaced with an indescribable excitement. Since the demons could win the war, the rewards promised to him would no longer be an illusory matter. The contrast was incomparable to a drowning person being rescued, it was a direct return to the peak. As for the knight who escaped, they would probably regret it for the rest of their lives. No, that's not right, they would not have the qualifications to live to the end of their lives. Once I become the Queen of Everwinter, I will definitely teach the traitors a lesson. Marwain knelt down excitedly and lowered his head to Haxord. Yes, we have. The other nobles did the same. This is my race's deity of gods, and also the most direct way to display power. Sky Lord placed his hands behind his back and said, I did not bring all of you here to dispel your doubts, I have a mission for all of you to complete. Please instruct us. Everyone immediately replied. The deity of gods still needs some time to reach the impassable mountain range, but the territories that you are in charge of are showing signs of losing control. Every fugitive can turn into an enemy of the race, I do not wish for the situation to worsen. He swept his gaze across everyone. From today onwards, all of you are to gather manpower and move everyone in the city here. At the same time, I will carve out a region in the deity of gods for all of you to reside in until the end of the battle of divine will. You, wish for those lowly people to ascend the miracle? Narnos asked in surprise. Whose fault do you think it is? Haxord glanced at him coldly. The latter immediately shut his mouth. The news of the knight's escape will spread to the lower ranks in no time, and when that happens, the order in Everwinter will completely collapse. Rather than letting them be used by Greycastle, why not control them before the snowball gets bigger? If there are any objections, use swords and blades to shut them up. This shouldn't be a difficult task for all of you. Of course. Marwain was the first to respond. I'll do it right away. The other nobles also agreed one after another. Don't worry, your territory will not be abandoned because of this, because the war will not last that long. Haxord seemed to see through their worries. In addition, following the deity of gods into action means that you are participating in the war. This will greatly increase the weight of your contributions. When the time comes, the human kingdoms will definitely not ignore this point, do you understand what I mean? The nobles were instantly overjoyed. The failure of the sneak attack on the Greycastle team had undoubtedly not satisfied the senior demon lord. Now that they had a chance to make up for their mistake, and perhaps even take it a step further, everyone's spirits were roused. Yes. We will definitely do our best. Haxord opened a new portal. It's good that you understand. I only have 2 requests. The faster the time transfer, the better, and you must not reveal the existence of the deity of gods. Then, let's move at once. After sending the Everwinter nobles away, he returned to the depths of the Great Rift Valley. Haxord was under a lot of pressure to allow the low-energy worms in the eyes of the majority of his people to come into contact with the deity of gods. At the very least, the senior demon lords were not united, and Mask even felt that it was a form of blasphemy. But he still forcefully carried it out with his identity as the Western Front commander. Sky Lord gradually understood that there was nothing special about the Greycastle warriors. They might have been farmers or hunters in the past, but after a few months of training, they would join the army as new soldiers. The firearms in their hands were enough to kill a well-trained primal demon. In other words, the efficiency of the other party's conversion of soldiers far exceeded the past experience of his race. Even the symbiotic demons that Mask was so proud of were unable to achieve such an astonishing conversion speed. That was why Greycastle was frantically plundering people from Everwinter and Kingdom of Wolfheart. It was not a burden, nor was it a long-term plan, but a genuine short-term benefit. Once the order maintained by the nobles crumbled, they would be handing over a large number of warriors to the enemy. This was something that Haxord absolutely did not wish to happen. At the same time, these people were not inferior to the inferior demons in terms of work. It would be a pity to kill them all, so it was better to migrate them to the deity of gods and serve the race. Under such circumstances, this decision could be said to be the most reasonable choice. Of course, it was not something that he could care about if the other members of his race acknowledged it. What God's creation, what holy place, none of it was more important than victory. He had already staked everything on the Western Front. Not only did he make an oath with the king, he had even applied for the deity of gods. The criticism and accusations were nothing more than a new debt. Compared to the pressure from the upper echelons, the problem that gave Haxord a bigger headache came from Sky City. He slowly walked down the stone steps to the bottom of the birth tower. In the red mist pond that was as dense as liquid, there was an additional black figure. He sat cross-legged in front of the Nightmare Lord, holding onto her palm without moving, like a stone statue. You still haven't given up? Haxord frowned in dissatisfaction. If I could find traces of her through the realm of mind, I would have done so a long time ago. He did not know what kind of bad luck he had encountered, or why every one of his comrades was so unreliable. This person was Silent Disaster, who had come to reinforce the Western Front. Just like its name, it wore a set of airtight armor most of the time and rarely showed its true face. It basically didn't open its mouth either, so no one knew what was going on in its head. But he was different from Mask and the other senior lords. His individual strength was outstanding among the senior lords, so Sky Lord could not be too harsh on him. If it were anyone else, Sky Lord would have already started cursing. After all, it was not easy for reinforcements to arrive. But the moment they arrived at Sky City, they did not ask about the battle situation or understand the enemy's situation. Instead, they ran straight to the red mist pond and accompanied the Nightmare Lord's body. Everyone knew that once one got lost in the realm of mind, it was impossible to return to the starting point. In the vast sea, there were ocean currents and the sun and stars to guide them, but in the realm of mind, there was nothing. It was always chaotic, and the torrents at the bottom were like storms. It was extremely difficult to maintain oneself, not to mention the constant erosion of other consciousnesses. The Nightmare Lord had been lost for several months. Even if it could be found, it would definitely not be the it from before. It must have found some clues to take such a risk, Silent Disaster replied. Silent Disaster gave a rare reply. Anything related to Valkyries, I must personally verify it. Clearly, Silent Disaster did not trust him. Haxord rubbed his forehead helplessly. Although the Nightmare Lord was a very special existence to other senior lords, it was even more special to some people. Silent Disaster was one of them. If he remembered correctly, the Nightmare Lord's ascension ceremony was presided over by the Nightmare Lord. Are you done verifying it now? More or less, but my conclusion is different from yours, Silent Disaster said concisely. I believe that the Nightmare Lord is not completely lost, but is trapped somewhere in the realm of mind. Reason? Intuition. Intuition. Haxord cursed inwardly. If there was anything more unreliable than Mask's promise, it would probably be Silent Disaster's intuition. Will this conclusion be of any help to the outcome? You can't find any traces of the Nightmare Lord, nor can you wake it up. In the end, nothing can be changed. Instead of spending time here, why not think about how to deal with the humans? That male. Silent Disaster glanced at him. What? I will help you destroy the humans. That is my purpose here. She suddenly stood up from the red mist pond, a dangerous red light flashing under her helmet. But the mail that appeared in the inheritance hall must be handed over to me. I believe that the Nightmare Lord's whereabouts must be related to him. Vertex M. Chapter 1385. 5 days later, while transporting the goods, Farina and Joe received a message from the liaison officer of the First Army. The commander-in-chief of the army, Iron Axe, wanted to see them. They went all the way to the Cage Mountain command post. When they entered the conference room, Farina found that there was more than one person in the room. Judging from the badges on their shoulders, they were all high-ranking officials of the First Army. Joe swallowed nervously. Farina looked calm and saluted them. Farina, member of the No. 2 Transport Unit No. 1, reporting for duty. Iron Axe and the other officers returned the salute with a smile, without putting on airs. She couldn't help but feel slightly surprised. The style of the Church of Hermes had made her used to ignoring the social gap and dealing with things straightforwardly. She did not expect that the high-ranking military officials of Grey Castle were the same, or even worse. She was calm because she had a clear conscience, but it did not mean that she had forgotten that she was once a criminal of the judgment army of the Church. It was not surprising that she was slighted. However, the crowd did not show any signs of contempt. Even the Church could not be so friendly to non-believers. "May I know why you called me here?" Farina's eyes finally fell on Iron Axe. "Do you remember the night of Everwinter you caught in the sedimentation bay a few days ago?" Iron Axe went straight to the point. "We've confirmed their identities and the crimes they committed." Farina suddenly realized something. "Are they very important to the First Army?" "Yes and no," Iron Axe said slowly. For the whole war situation, they are not worth mentioning at all, but for those who sacrificed their lives for this war, their capture means that the criminals will not be able to escape punishment after all. In this way, we can finally comfort those who sacrificed themselves. Then Farina heard a story about blood-stained intelligence. At first, the news of the intruders did not attract the attention of the higher-ups. After all, there were 3 or 4 fugitives who tried to bluff their way through every day. They were either minor nobles or wealthy merchants, and their reasons for escaping were that they had committed crimes or were afraid of being plundered. According to Lorger's report, the 2 Everwinter Night clearly belonged to the former category. However, due to the complex and strong smell of blood, the interrogators were more meticulous in their investigation. After a series of psychological games and forced them to confess, the younger brother was the first to succumb. He confessed everything they had done. A few months ago, the 2 brothers were ordered by the Liege to capture fugitives near the city. However, because the eldest brother had a grudge against the people of Grey Castle, he bore a grudge against them and turned the capture into a hunt. If it was just a normal murder case, the punishment would be nothing more than a death sentence or a lifetime of mining. However, the hunting of fugitives incident made the higher-ups in charge of approval and filing pay attention to it. In the end, the case was handed over to the intelligence department and investigated by Hill Fox. However, there were 2 biggest blind spots in this case. First, the First Army still did not know who the sender of the intelligence was. They only knew that the deceased was from black money. Secondly, considering the other party's casualness in killing, even if it was related to the blood-stained information, the 2 of them might not be able to recognize it. In other words, even if Nightingale was present, she would not be able to determine the relationship between the 2 parties through the authenticity of their words. The only breakthrough seemed to be the smell of blood that the wolf girl had mentioned. Unfortunately, Lorger could only confirm the variety of blood types. It was difficult for her to accurately identify a smell that was too old. After all, her sense of smell was just an additional benefit of her ability to transform. Although she was not affected by the God's Stone, she could not surpass the limits of her physiological structure. The final decision was made by the assistants sent by the Witch Union, Vanilla and Broken Sword. With the help of Broken Sword's ability, Vanilla found the same pheromone on Talos Murray's leg armor as the bloodstain on the secret letter. Even though it was only a small amount, it was already conclusive evidence. If the 2 of them had never met, how could they be infected with the same pheromone? Therefore, the Murray brothers must be the murderers of the sender of the intelligence. So there are such people among the civilians. After listening to Iron Axe's explanation, Joe could not help but sigh. Currently, the kingdom of Everwinter is still occupied by demons, so we can't publicize him like other heroic cases. But history will not forget people like him. Iron Axe sighed and said, "You are the main contributors to the arrest of the murderer, but you are not part of the army. So, in addition to informing me of the results of the investigation, I also want to ask what kind of reward you would like to receive." "But we didn't do much," Farina said bluntly. The first one to notice something strange was the witch. "I only heard the noise of their fight and went over to help." Her words caused a burst of good-natured laughter. Don't worry. His Majesty never misses out on any meritorious person, Iron Axe explained. The Witch Union and the Army are two different departments, so Miss Lorger's reward will be handled by someone else. In theory, your reward should also be issued by the administrative office, but the front line of the battlefield can only be handled in a simple way, so we will consult on your behalf. I understand. Farina hesitated for a moment. I used to be a member of the Judgment Army of the Church and was deceived by hypocrisy and lies. But if possible, I hope to get a chance to make up for my mistakes. Make up for your mistakes? Yes. She took a deep breath. Joining the First Army is the reward I want. The room suddenly became quiet. Everyone looked around and seemed to be exchanging opinions. After a while, Iron Axe said, "The recruitment rules of the First Army are set by His Majesty. I can't agree to your request." Is that so? Farina slightly clenched her fists and suddenly loosened a little. However, Iron Axe changed the topic. I can write your merits and request in the report and submit it to His Majesty to decide, if you insist. Farina raised her head and her eyes suddenly lit up. Yes, please. She naturally knew that once she joined the army, all her actions in the future would be more restricted, and the risk of facing the enemy would increase exponentially. But that was the path she longed for. The more thorny the road was, the more she could make up for the sins she had committed. After Farina and Joe left, the other officers also dispersed. Soon, only Iron Axe and Edith were left in the meeting room. The Pearl of the Northern Region, who had been silent all this time, let out a long sigh. That's why I said that the Church of Hermes is really terrible. Since they haven't been sentenced, they don't have any crimes or mistakes. I'm afraid only the believers of the Holy City would have such an eccentric habit. Iron Axe shrugged indifferently. He had long known that Edith was a shrewd egoist who occasionally made concessions in order to seek greater benefits. When their interests were aligned, she was an impeccable partner, but when their interests were opposite, it was hard to predict what she would do. The Pearl of the Northern Region would never make a decision like Farina's, who would sacrifice herself for free. But Iron Axe did not dislike it. Compared with those stupid, arrogant, or greedy egoists, the former could at least distinguish their real goals and would not do stupid things because of a moment of short-sightedness. So, how do you think we should deal with the two criminals? Iron Axe brought the topic back to business. In his reply to this matter, His Majesty had mentioned that, if the case is proved to be committed by the Everwinter Knight, he will have full authority to decide. According to the past practice, the two basically had to go to the gallows since they were responsible for nearly 100 people's lives. If it's just hanging, I think His Majesty doesn't need to specially remind us. Edith showed a hint of a sneer. And don't you think it's too easy for them to be sent to the afterlife? You have an idea. Since it can't be used as promotional material, it's better to give it to Black Money as a gift. I think they'll definitely treat them well after paying such a high price. Vertex M. Chapter 1386. Thorn Town, Kingdom of Dawn. This desolate town at the foot of the Cage Mountain had now become a bustling place. Apart from being the outpost of the Cage Mountain Command Center, it was also the location of the frontline training camp of the Air Knight Academy. To meet the huge expenses of the Air Knight Academy, the engineering team built several wide hardened cement roads that connected to the north-south artery and reached the northernmost port of the Kingdom of Dawn. The large amount of resources naturally attracted the attention of the merchants in the Kingdom of Dawn. After losing the trade routes between the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter, Grey Castle became their biggest hope of making profits. It provided services ranging from freight to wine. With business opportunities came people. In just a year, the size of the town had expanded several times. Taverns and hotels that could only be seen in big cities in the past sprung up like mushrooms after a spring rain, and they spread around the center of the town in a disorderly manner. Tilly, who often flew across the sky, felt this change the most. Before the snow fell, if one looked down from the sky, one could clearly see the outline and composition of the town. The dullest color was the houses of the Aborigines. After decades of exposure to the wind and sun, the tiles on the roofs were mottled with dark brown and turquoise. There were not many of them, and they still maintained the original appearance of Thorntown. However, the colors on the periphery suddenly changed. Some of the new houses were built of wood, some of them were built of stone, and some of them were even built of cement. Apparently, after Greycastle spread the calcination technology to the Kingdom of Dawn, some nobles and merchants had begun to try to use this new building material. The snowfall brought by the months of demons had weakened the difference between the old and new areas, but people could still recognize the general changes in the town from the messy layout of the latter. This was probably how Border Town had evolved step by step. After sending off Vanilla and Broken Sword, Tilly once again threw herself into her daily training. Based on her suggestions, there were already more than 40 Skyfire Type 2s that had been improved. In addition to the 20 old Type Is, the aerial knights had already become a force to be reckoned with in the army. In fact, the success of the First Army's counterattack was inseparable from the biplane's air cover. Compared to the anti-aircraft machine guns, the Fire of Heaven posed a much greater threat to the devil beasts, and without any effective means of penetration, the artillerymen could safely use their range advantage to bombard the demons' outpost and retreat before the enemy could surround them. As long as the senior demons did not appear, it would be difficult for the enemy to approach the First Army. Every time a combat mission was carried out, dozens of Fires of Heaven would glide across the runway like an elephant strolling, taking off one after another with the smallest gap between them. The rumbling of the engines could be heard clearly even from a small town away. Such a spectacular scene was hard to describe with words. Even the charge of the night couldn't compare. Anyone who witnessed such a scene would have a new understanding of the power of Greycastle. This scene became a great spectacle in Thorntown. Many nobles of the Kingdom of Dawn came to verify the legend of the Sky Knight. Gradually, even on normal training days, the roofs of the buildings around the landing area would be filled with people, excitedly watching the flying figures of the giant steel birds. Tilly also found out that the seats with a wide field of vision were charged. Of course, the development of the Sky Knight Academy was not without obstacles. At least, compared to the production of the Fire of Heaven, the problem of the slow increase in the number of pilots had gradually become apparent. After all, the recruitment threshold was there. Not only did it require a certain level of cultural foundation, but it also required a body that could adapt to flying. Only after meeting these requirements could they enter the next stage of training. As for how long it took for them to participate in actual combat, it all depended on their talent. Tilly had met a few students who performed well during training but would panic once they were in the air. In the end, they could only join the logistics team to do their part. If not for the fact that the Fire of Heaven 2 was changed from a two-seater to a single-seater, temporarily alleviating the problem of the shortage of pilots, the Sky Knight Regiment would have been faced with the predicament of having a plane but no pilots. Other than continuing to expand the scope of recruitment and increasing the number of preparatory students, she did not have any better ideas. Fortunately, her brother also valued the Sky Knight Regiment very much, and more importantly, he almost never rejected her suggestions. This problem should be able to be improved by the time the next batch of preparatory students arrived in Thorntown. The intensive test flights and landings would only come to an end at noon. As an extraordinary, Tilly did not need to recover her energy through a lunch break. During this period of time when she was temporarily relieved of her duties as an instructor, she would often choose to fly alone for a while. This was to verify some of the new ideas that came to her mind during the training, and also to enjoy the process of flying. But this time, she noticed something strange in the warehouse area of the landing area. Regardless of whether it was the students or the ground crew, they did not immediately disperse. Instead, they gathered around the warehouse, as if attracted by something. Soon, a guard reported the situation to her. "Your Highness, Neverwinter seems to have sent a new batch of supplies. They need you to check and confirm it." New supplies? Tilly raised her eyebrows. She did not remember such an arrangement in today's schedule. But the two places were thousands of miles apart, so it was not strange for Neverwinter to make last-minute adjustments. When they reached the warehouse area, everyone made way for them. But before she could see the goods, she first heard a familiar voice. Lady Tilly. She saw Molly skipping over and throwing herself into her arms. Tilly helplessly rubbed the little girl's head, only to realize that the one in charge of unloading the goods was the magic servant. The latter swelled up like a blue balloon, carefully swallowing the goods on the steam truck before slowly transporting them into the warehouse. So, is this the reason why everyone stopped here? No. That's not entirely the case. When Tilly turned her gaze to the long goods, she suddenly realized that the answer was not so simple. There were a total of 3 goods, and from the cold metal material of the boxes, these boxes were clearly the same as the ones used to transport the fire of heaven, except that the size was much larger and the overall appearance was more slender. Moreover, the 2 sides of the boxes were painted with bright red cloud patterns, like a pair of opened wings. Decorating the transport boxes seemed to be a meaningless matter, but it was precisely because of this that it was especially special. Tilly's heart could not help but skip a beat. By the way, do you have any requirements for the color of the body? Since there is no specific requirement, how about red? Roland's words echoed in her ears. What's the difference? Most protagonists who dominate the sky use this color. The ground crew had already skillfully removed the fastening bolts on the first goods box. As the seal was slowly lowered, the crowd gasped in surprise. A body that had never been seen before appeared in front of everyone. Vertex M. Chapter 1387. Its entire body was smooth, and no matter how one looked at it, the lines on its surface were smooth curves. The bright and clean paint surface could even reflect one's reflection. The cockpit was like a bulging bubble, completely wrapped in flawless glass. It was obvious that the effects of the high-speed airflow had been taken into account. The cockpit was positioned towards the back, and the rear of the bubble was slightly higher than the front, smoothly blending into the body. The benefits of such a layout were obvious at a glance. The front was low, and the rear was high, which clearly enhanced the pilot's field of vision. And the curvature of the glass cover combined with the rear rudder, making the body look extremely clean and neat, with every part of the body as one. And the biggest difference of the new plane, which was also a feature that no student would overlook, was the lack of a propeller at the front. Without the flat engine, the entire head finally converged into a sharp cone, giving off a feeling of piercing through the clouds and waves. Most of the body was painted a bright orange-red, making it look like a slender flame. A few white lines ran from the head to the tail, giving the body a sense of vitality. Even a layman who knew nothing about flying could feel the elegance and beauty of its outline. At first sight of the new plane, Tilly discovered that she had fallen deeply in love with it. But, without a propeller, how would the plane fly? It was not only Tilly, but most of the people present had the same thought. It was only after the other 2 boxes were opened that the question was answered. The second box contained the wings and tail. From the number of parts, it only had 1 pair of wings, unlike the fire of heaven which had a pair of wings. There were 2 symmetrical ports at the bottom of the wings, obviously reserved for other large parts. The last crate contained 2 engines. But if it was just an engine, its size was a little too big. Compared to the fire of heaven, it was more like an integrated body that could be replaced at any time. The attentive Tilly had already noticed that its surface was painted the same red as the body. There were many inspection holes on it, and the holes at the bottom of the propeller's shaft were impressively installed with black weapons. Thinking of the ports on the wings, the general appearance of the new plane gradually appeared in her mind. The fuselage no longer carried the power system, and the slender single wing was located under the fuselage, further reducing the drag. The 2 engines were distributed on both sides of the wing, giving the aircraft double the thrust. She couldn't wait to board it and experience it for herself. By the way, Molly rummaged in her pocket and took out a letter. His Majesty sent this along with the goods. The envelope clearly states that it must be opened by you personally. Tilly took out the letter and opened it. My dear sister. This is the gift I promised. I hope it will satisfy you. The detailed introduction and specific parameters are all in the instruction manual in the cockpit, but I think you most likely won't read it carefully. Instead, you'll rush straight to the topic. If it can fly now, you will probably read this letter after it has flown. That is why I sent it to the Kingdom of Dawn. At least you'll have time to read the manual while the workers assemble. After all, it has a completely different structure and characteristics from the fire of heaven. Even if you are an extraordinaire, there is no harm in understanding it before taking off. What? Tilly pouted awkwardly. Was she that easy to understand? What did His Majesty say? I want to read it too. Molly moved her head closer. She hurriedly turned her body to block Molly's line of sight. Ahem, it's all nonsense. It's fine if you don't read it. Do you want some chaos drinks? Yes. Go to my office and get it. Tilly pointed with her finger, and Molly immediately ran in the direction Tilly had pointed at. She let out a light sigh and shifted her gaze back to the letter. Also, it's about the name of this aircraft. I wanted to use the previous name of the unicorn, but I felt that it was lacking something compared to the red lightning that dominated the sky. So, I decided to change it to a new name. It was a term that Tilly had never seen before. Without a doubt, it was coined by Roland. She tried to read it. Phoenix, where I come from, the phoenix is a type of divine bird. It is always related to fire and matches the color red. Of course, most importantly, it is said that the phoenix is immortal and will form a golden cocoon every 4,600 days. After 4,600 days, it will break out of the cocoon and be reborn. This is what I want to say as well. No matter what enemies we face, I hope that you can return alive. Just like the phoenix. Just like the phoenix. I will bring back ashes for you, so you have to keep your promise. We agreed on it, didn't we? For some reason, Tilly suddenly felt her eyes turning sore. She blinked her eyes hard, resisted the surge of warmth, and took a deep breath. The phoenix is immortal. She muttered in a voice that only she could hear. Not a bad name. I will accept this gift, brother. Your Highness. The guard asked curiously. It's nothing. Tilly raised her hand. Inform the ground crew to install the Phoenix as soon as possible. I can't wait for the test flight. 3 days later, the newly assembled plane drove out of the hangar and slowly glided onto the runway. Oh. This is the special plane you mentioned. It looks pretty good. Lightning's voice came from the sigil of listening. Tilly raised her head. Through the glass cover, she could clearly see the exploration duo circling in the sky. As it was the first flight of the Phoenix, she had specially called for Lightning and Maggie to prevent any accidents. It had to be said that the interior design of the plane was much more outstanding than the exterior. When she sat in the cockpit, she even had the misconception that it was not a pure war machine. For example, the seat was thicker and softer, and she would not feel her back aching after driving for a long period of time. The various lever and buttons had control feedback, making it easier to use. There was also a slot specially reserved for the sigil of listening, allowing her to easily converse with multiple users even in battle. Compared to the unicorn, it was more like a plane specially designed for her. Do you want to compete to see who can fly faster? Tilly replied with a smile. Forget it. The previous fire of heaven couldn't even compare to Maggie's petrol form, let alone me. Lightning's tone revealed an undisguised pride. Am I right? That's right, you can't even beat me, Koo. How will we know if we don't try? Tilly stepped on the accelerator, and the roar of the engines on both sides suddenly became louder. Compared to the slow acceleration of the fire of heaven, the Phoenix's fuselage was so light that it seemed weightless. The surrounding scenery rapidly receded, and with a light tap of the control stick, the plane rose up and whizzed into the sky. Shook Ju website. Chapter 1388. After crossing the Cage Mountain, the trio turned west and headed towards the impassable mountain range. In less than half an hour, Maggie was the first to be defeated. At an altitude of 1,500 meters, the Phoenix easily flew at a speed of 400 kilometers per hour with its two engines. Although Maggie's petrol form could also reach this speed, she could only maintain it for a short while. Against the tireless 14-cylinder engine, it was only a matter of time before she was left behind. "How is it?" Tilly covered her mouth. I can still fly." Chirp. On the other side, Maggie was already gasping for breath. "You've done your best. Let me do the rest." Lightning pulled her partner, who was unwilling to admit defeat, into her arms and took over the second stage of the competition. A human and a plane began a new pursuit in the dusky sky. The scenery under her feet became smaller and smaller, and the mountain range that separated the human kingdoms gradually became a winding ink line. Tilly could see the red mist slowly flowing down from the ridge of the continent and above the kingdom of Everwinter and the kingdom of Wolfheart, like a turbid barrier. The land within the barrier was undoubtedly filled with scarlet, but as long as they could soar into the sky, they would be able to see the true appearance of the world. "Is this your limit?" Lightning's voice sounded. "I can fly much faster than this." Just in terms of flying speed, her ability was indeed unparalleled. Even Sky Lord, who possessed the ability to teleport, had suffered under her hands. But to Tilly, victory or defeat was not the most important thing. Piloting this enormous yet agile machine and maximizing its performance was already a form of enjoyment. She retracted her gaze and smiled. Pulling the nose of the plane, she flew towards a higher altitude. Lightning followed suit and maintained a position of about 100 meters in front of the plane. According to the introduction in the manual, the Phoenix had received technological improvements from the dream world, and the key parts were personally processed by Anna. It possessed a basic quality that far exceeded that of the Fire of Heaven. It could fly at a maximum speed of 550 km per hour, and its maximum range exceeded 1,500 km. The dual star-shaped engines were also equipped with a turbine system, allowing it to fly at altitudes of more than 3,000 meters without losing much of its performance. This was something that the mass-produced models could not achieve. But that was not the Phoenix's greatest characteristic. Its body structure had been jointly strengthened by Candle and Doris, and its strength and durability could be said to be above the material itself. It could be regarded as the first aircraft that combined industrial technology and magic power. Tilly knew that the propeller was most efficient at low speed, and as the speed increased, its propulsive efficiency would rapidly decrease. So it was almost impossible to catch up to Lightning's back with its own power. She needed the help of other forces. After rising to a high altitude, Tilly pushed the accelerator to the maximum and pressed down hard on the joystick. The engine immediately let out a loud roar. The Phoenix made a sharp turn and entered a dive. To ensure that she was always at the front, Lightning adjusted her direction and rapidly descended. But to prevent any mutual influence, she pulled the horizontal distance to about 1 kilometer, while maintaining a vertical distance of 100 meters. At this height and speed, the light membrane of magic power was extremely obvious. Dazzling ripples formed a protective layer around her, preventing her from being affected by the cold winds and low pressure. There was no doubt that Lightning's magic power consumption in this state was much greater than when she was flying normally. During the ability test, Roland had mentioned that the reason why Lightning could not fly at supersonic speed for long periods of time was not because of the large amount of magic power required to fly, but because the consumption of magic power would greatly increase when the body was in an extremely short environment. Thus, she would rarely enter supersonic speed during her patrols. To a witch, casually exhausting her magic power was an extremely dangerous matter. Of course, Tilly was not feeling well either. The thin air at high altitudes made it extremely difficult for her to breathe, and with the engine operating at full speed and the strong winds blowing against her, the cabin was filled with noise and tremors. Without the protection of magic power, she could only rely on her body to endure. According to the airspeed indicator, the Phoenix was already approaching 800 km per hour. This had greatly exceeded the upper limit of its extreme speed. Although Lightning was still maintaining a stable position in front of the plane, she did not have the time to use the sigil of listening to communicate with her. That's right, Tilly was borrowing the power of gravity. Previously, when piloting the biplane, she had discovered that when she converted the accumulated altitude into speed, she could easily break through the limits of the plane. But the risk of such excessive speed could not be ignored. If it was light, she would not be able to pull the plane up again, and if it was heavy, she would disintegrate in midair. If not for her ability to sense that critical point, she would definitely not have boldly used a dive to increase her speed during the test flight. But even so, the chances of catching up to lightning were minuscule. She remembered Roland mentioning that due to the limitations of the propeller, a piston plane had to pay a huge price to exceed the speed of sound. In other words, the gains did not make up for the losses, to the point that propellers were quickly replaced by jet engines. But lightning could break through the sound barrier at any time, and the difference between the two was not on the same level. Thus, she still needed the help of other things. As the altitude rapidly descended, the dense dark clouds occupying an altitude of 2,500 meters crashed towards the two of them. The Phoenix roared as it charged into the dark clouds, causing a fog pillar to splash out from the clouds. At this moment, the plane's speed had exceeded 900 kilometers per hour, and tremors began to spread from the plane to the wings. She could feel the wings cutting through the viscous airflow like a blade, and the high-speed friction caused the air to no longer be an illusory object, but a thick and solid wall. Lightning disappeared from her vision. Tilly knew that her chance had arrived. She focused all her attention on the control of the plane. At this speed, the propeller's thrust was equivalent to the resistance, and an ordinary person should be thinking of how to pull the plane back up, and not make it dive even faster. Only Tilly was able to maintain precise control under such violent tremors, and use the rudder to further increase the speed. Although the increase in speed was not large, it was enough to close the gap with the leader. When the Phoenix reached its limit, she charged out of the cloud layer. The vast and boundless land once again appeared before her eyes. At the same time, lightning also appeared. Compared to her previous stable lead of 100 meters, she was now at the same level as the new plane. Realizing this, the latter instantly entered the speed of sound, but quickly decelerated and turned to the cockpit. As expected of Her Royal Highness, Lightning's expression didn't show much frustration, but rather admiration. You can even take the clouds into consideration. If it was any thinner, I wouldn't be able to catch up to you. Tilly flattened the plane and replied with a smile. From the start, her plan was to use the natural dive to allow Lightning to adapt to the stable acceleration, and finally overtake under the cover of the dark clouds. Even though it was only for an instant, the Phoenix had managed to close the gap. Wait a minute, where are we flying to, Coo? Maggie popped her head out from Lightning's bosom. Ah. Tilly turned to look, only to discover an unfamiliar scenery below them, and the impassable mountain range had already been left far behind them. She was too engrossed in the chase and did not notice how far they had flown towards the northwest. This should be a part of the fertile plains. It shouldn't be wrong. Lightning took out a telescope. But this is the fertile plains that we have never set foot on before. If we follow the route, our east should be the border between the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter, and right in front of us is the ridge of the continent. At this point, she suddenly stopped. What's wrong? Tilly looked in the direction she pointed, and then froze in place. The mountain range hidden in the clouds was faintly discernible, and it was much taller and grander than the impassable mountain range. But as she had heard of its existence from Agatha and the exploration group, she was not too surprised to see it for the first time. What shocked her was above the mountain range. A gloomy and oppressive layer of dark red clouds occupied the peak of the mountain. Countless lightning bolts flickered within, as though it was a storm made of fresh blood. Without a doubt, it was not a natural phenomenon. The red clouds gave her an extremely uneasy feeling. Chapter 1389. Cage Mountain, Command Post. Captain, there's another report. Clown walked to Hill Fox with a piece of paper in his hand. Even though it had been a few years since the incident, the first few circus companions still habitually addressed him as their leader. Where did it come from? Hill took the piece of paper and scanned through it. Can you trace it back to its source? The messenger was released in the southern part of the Kingdom of Everwinter. There are a total of 3 cities there. Apart from that, there are no other hints on the sealed circle. Hill frowned and pondered for a moment. Then, he suddenly stood up. Help me inform Sir Iron Axe and Her Excellency Edith that we might be in trouble. 15 minutes later. Edith put down the report and lightly tapped the table. In other words, this is happening all over the kingdom of Everwinter at the same time? Hill nodded. Although we can't confirm which cities are carrying out this order, from the distribution of the intelligence, it's not an exaggeration to say that it's a general movement. In the past few days, the intelligence department had received several secret letters with similar contents. The letters showed that the nobles were forcibly relocating the local residents. All of them were moving towards the north. The similarity was so consistent, but the information came from different regions, so it was almost impossible for it to be false or false. In other words, the nobles of the Kingdom of Everwinter were carrying out a unified operation. Although the secret letter simply mentioned the word relocation, it was by no means a trivial matter. There was a limit to the carrying capacity of a city. Too few or too many people would lead to paralysis. There were more things to consider during the relocation, such as food for the people, temporary housing, belongings, and so on. Neverwinter definitely had a deep understanding of this. It could even be said that the cities ruled by the old nobles did not have the ability to complete a large-scale relocation. Without the support of strong power and resources, the so-called relocation was just a road to death. Indeed, most nobles did not care about the lives of the civilians, but that was only when the civilians were individuals. The lord's taxation and rule were inseparable from the civilians. If there was no one under his rule, no matter how powerful his power was, it would be meaningless. Once the civilians realized that they could not benefit from the relocation, they would inevitably lose the support of the people. Moreover, it was easy to cause a riot if a large number of people were gathered together. Therefore, even the most domineering and unreasonable nobles would not easily do such a shocking thing. But now, it was not only a noble doing this, but the entire north was doing it. It was obviously under the instruction of other forces. In the kingdom of eternal winter, only the devils had the ability to do so. But why would the demons do that? If they just want to weaken Greycastle, they can kill all the civilians. If there are spider demons, the nobles can't stop them even if they don't want to. Maybe the demons think, they're still useful, the Light of Dawn speculated. If they're useful, then we shouldn't have forcefully relocated them. Hill shook his head. The kingdom of Everwinter has the least number of big cities among the 4 kingdoms. Even King City can only accommodate 20 to 30,000 people without prior preparation. Not to mention that their migration route doesn't end at King City. The northernmost big city is. Edith looked at the map. The Snow Reflection Castle is backed by the source of the impassable mountain range. Its area is only half the size of the capital. Philin immediately added the relevant information. Due to its unique terrain, the permanent population is even lower. It is also the first place where the red mist appeared. If the demons want to move all the people here, it's no different from killing them, Hill said. And the enemy wouldn't do such an unnecessary thing. Edith nodded in agreement. I think there must be some unforeseen event that caused the demons to take this seemingly inexplicable action. Then what's the unforeseen event? Iron Axe asked. I don't know. Edith said slowly. But I don't think it's good news. Let's inform the front line and ask them to be on high alert. Is this red cloud where the Devil's Obelisk is? Tilly murmured. No, Lightning replied solemnly. At this distance, we shouldn't be able to see the red mist. Can't see it? Why? Because the red mist flows downward, Coo. Maggie replied. I've seen the mist pouring down from the edge of the impassable mountain range like a waterfall, Coo. That's right. I don't know if it's because the red mist is heavier than the air, so it gathers more easily at low altitudes. But one thing is for sure. When the red mist entered the kingdom of Everwinter from the ridge of the continent, the mountain peak wasn't red. Lightning added. You mean, it flowed down along the gullies? Tilly raised her eyebrows. That was why she said they couldn't see the red mist at this distance. They were now hundreds of kilometers away from the highest mountain range on the continent. If the red mist didn't rise, it would be obstructed by the mountains. Not only that, Lightning confirmed. A month ago, I patrolled along the impassable mountain range to the north and approached the edge of the red mist area. But at that time, there was no red cloud on the ridge of the continent. It doesn't seem to rise from the Great Rift. Tilly couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. At this time, she also gradually noticed that the red on the mountain peak wasn't just a thin layer, but a whole hole from top to bottom. To be more precise, it was like a huge cloud pillar pouring down from the clouds. She stared at the strange scene before her and remained silent for a long while before saying, "There's a way to let us see it more clearly." Lightning raised her head and looked at the dense dark clouds. "I think so too." The higher they flew, the further they could see. As long as they could see the ridge of the continent, they would be able to see the true appearance of the red cloud. Since that's the case, let's give it a try. Tilly pushed the throttle to the maximum and pulled the nose of the plane towards the cloud layer. Lightning followed closely beside the cockpit, trying her best to cover Tilly with her magic. With the cooperation of the two, the altimeter on the Phoenix slowly deviated towards the end. When they reached an altitude of 7,500 meters, the land had a distinct arc. The dark clouds had become intermittent and no longer as a whole, and the edge of the land had a faint blue color. Dense beads of sweat appeared on Lightning's forehead. It was obvious that the high altitude had placed a huge burden on her synchronization barrier. Through the glass window, Tilly noticed that the fuselage was covered in white frost. If not for the other party using magic to reduce the discomfort she felt, she would not have been able to focus on piloting the plane. It's about time. Tilly could clearly feel that the thrust of the engine was rapidly weakening. Let's find a gap from here. Leave it to me, Coo. Maggie peeked out and transformed into eagle-eye mode. About 15 minutes later, she found an excellent vantage point. Through the gaps between the layers of clouds, she could see a small outline of the ridge of the continent. But when the scene above the red mist was reflected in the telescope, the trio could not believe their eyes. They saw a floating piece of land. Chapter 1391. Are you sure you're not mistaken? When Iron Axe heard the news, a rare look of surprise appeared on his face. He exchanged a glance with Edith, and both of them could see the shock in each other's eyes. In fact, Tilly was also quite hesitant to report this discovery to the First Army's commander without knowing the truth. After all, this was almost a miracle. If the demons could really achieve this, it would inevitably have a negative impact on the morale and confidence of the higher-ups, and it would not be surprising for those who were not strong-willed to want to surrender. You're absolutely right, Coo. Maggie patted her chest and said, Lightning and I have been to the ridge of the continent, and there's no mountain of this shape there, Coo. Lightning then nodded slowly. We can't say for sure whether it's something created by the demons or not, but at least one thing is for sure, it appeared there in the last half a month. I see. Edith said thoughtfully, now it makes sense. You believe it? Tilly was greatly surprised. She had thought that Edith would need some time to digest this information and then arrange the next observation operation to confirm it. Unexpectedly, the Pearl of the Northern region seemed to have accepted their explanation. After all, even the three of them who had seen it with their own eyes had spent a lot of effort to reach a consensus that it was not an illusion. If you want to blame someone, blame Roland, Edith said with a sigh. If it were 3 years ago, I would have probably regarded this as the ravings of a madman. But now, no matter what happens, I don't think it's impossible. If we stay in a small place like before, we won't be able to realize that the world has undergone earth-shaking changes. Besides, the demon's illogical actions are equivalent to confirming this. She paused for a moment and briefly described the information obtained by Hill Fox. A noble city can't accommodate so many people, but a floating island may not be able to do so. The demons accommodate humans? Lightning said in surprise. This is not unprecedented. Didn't Agatha say that during the first battle of divine will, some humans formed an alliance with the demons to fight against witches? Edith shrugged carelessly. At that time, they were afraid of the power of witches, but now they're just afraid of the power of His Majesty. They're not willing to accept the change, nor are they willing to be part of the change, so there's only a limit to what they can do. They didn't take the warning of the battle of divine will seriously. Tilly could not help but clench her fists. No. Edith revealed a strange smile. Even if the nobles know it's true, they may still make the same decision. The end of the war could be years or decades later, but His Majesty's abolition of the power of the nobles and the recovery of the feudal lands was happening now. For some people, this is no different from taking their lives. One is to die immediately, the other is to die later. Of course, the latter is better. Enough, Iron Axe interrupted reluctantly. He knew that once the Pearl of the Northern region entered her taunting mode, she would not easily stop, and it was very easy for her to accidentally hurt others, or even himself. Edith's expression had returned. Edith, 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 Edith. Edith's expression returned to normal. No, we can't. It's fine if it's just staying at the ridge of the continent, but if it really moved from somewhere else, we'll be in deep trouble. For Her Highness Tilly to be able to observe it from hundreds of kilometers away, its size is probably beyond our imagination. Do you think that the fire of heaven alone can destroy a corner of the impassable mountain range? We have to inform Brother of this as soon as possible. Tilly said solemnly. I think so too. Edith nodded. This has nothing to do with stratagems or strategies. The only one who can come up with a solution is His Majesty. It's a pity that the new communication tower is still under construction. Otherwise, according to the installer, this thing would allow us to immediately communicate with His Majesty. Iron Axe walked to his desk and began writing a letter. No matter what, let's use the flying messenger to send the news back first. There's no need, I'll make the trip. Tilly stood up. With the Phoenix's speed, we can set off tomorrow morning and reach Neverwinter by noon. That's faster than any messenger. Also, I want to thank him for his new gift. With that, she looked at Lightning and Maggie. I'll leave the investigation west of the impassable mountain range to the two of you. Leave it to us. The two of them replied seriously. The next day, Tilly piloted the Phoenix and set off alone. She first headed east towards the sea before following the coastline south. In less than 4 hours, she landed in the Royal Capital Aerial Night Academy. On this day, many people witnessed the red meteor streaking across the sky. After she jumped off the plane, she ran all the way and rushed into the castle. Seeing her flying gray hair, none of the guards dared to stop her. Pushing open the office door, Roland blinked in surprise. He did not expect her to appear at this time. Is there a problem with the new plane? Tilly stopped in her tracks and suddenly felt a little guilty. Did I push him too hard? That's why he asked about the situation of the plane as soon as he opened his mouth. No, it's a private plane. I mean, the Phoenix is better than I expected. Thank you, brother. Phew. Roland heaved a sigh of relief, but his expression quickly turned solemn. Then you're back because you have important information? That's right. When I was testing the Phoenix, I accidentally discovered the demon's movements. Tilly recounted the trio's experience in detail. Roland could not help but frown after listening. For an object to be seen from a distance, other than the fact that there was nothing obstructing the path of light, the other factor was its size, such as the moon and stars overhead. Hundreds of kilometers away, the impassable mountain range was just a thick meandering line, and the ridge of the continent was just a gray hill. For it to be seen from such a distance, it was definitely not small. The demons already had the ability to move such a large piece of land into the sky. It was something that even modern technology could not achieve. If it was truly a solid piece of land, the lethality of any existing weapons would be greatly reduced. This was determined by physical properties. To be able to float such a huge weight meant that it possessed astonishing energy. Magic power is really unreasonable, but Roland had deeply understood this point when he first met Anna. The urgent matter at hand was to further investigate the gigantic object. He thought of an excellent candidate. Entering the dream world, Roland took out his phone and dialed Valkyrie's number. Chapter 1392. I'm going out. Are you going to the martial arts club again? Valkyries walked out of the bedroom in her nightgown and saw Fei Yuhan tidying up her luggage in front of the porch. Yes, the final battle is coming. I have to hurry. Fei Yuhan paused. Are you coming later? Seeing Fei Yuhan's determined expression, she fell into a momentary daze before nodding. If there's nothing else. Then I'm going. The door opened and closed, and the chill that had rushed in quickly dissipated. Valkyries looked down at her open palms and slowly clenched them into fists. Damn it, what exactly am I doing? In the past month, she had almost completely integrated into this world. Not only did she become a member of the Martialist Association, but she had also fought with others against the fallen evils. In order to prevent the world from being destroyed, she had to rebel against God. This might be the reason why she participated in the war, but Valkyries knew that it was more of a way to vent her stress. The real problem she had to face was not here, but outside the realm of mind. She was unwilling to be trapped here and do nothing, so she used this method to make it seem like she was contributing to the battle of divine will. If the battle was extremely cruel and arduous, it would be fine. After all, they were fighting against God. But the truth was that the elimination of the fallen evils only happened in the dark, unseen by the public. The whole city was still peaceful, and when there was no mission, everyone even had time to drink a cup of afternoon tea or have supper together at night. This was a far cry from the war she was used to. What made her feel even worse was that she had quickly adapted to this kind of life. The sweeter the soft peninsula bread, the more intense the guilt in her heart. The future of the race was uncertain. In order to win the battle of divine will, the people had invested almost everything, but she was enjoying a free and relaxed life. This contrast made Valkyries extremely miserable. Sometimes, she even wanted to vent her anger on the people around her. However, what was more painful was that her rationality was still there, and it was not distorted by the huge pressure. Her rationality clearly told her that doing so would not shatter the dream, and it would not help the race in any way. It would only make her situation worse. At the same time, another thing that stopped Nightmare Lord from doing so was that she realized that she didn't hate Fei Yuhan as much as she expected. Although this human woman had eavesdropped on her conversation with Roland, it was only a reasonable choice for an individual who wanted to control her own fate. Furthermore, she later revealed what she had done and calmly faced the fact that she only existed in the realm of mind. This courage was simply dazzling. She was pure, curious, determined, and had a clear goal. These characteristics made Valkyries think of the Transformer, Heathtullys. Some people's brilliance was enough to cross the divide between races, just like how the Transformer was accepted by the Cloud School. This was also the reason why she had never moved away from this place. However, not only did this light not reduce the pressure on her, but it also made her even more confused. In fact, Valkyries had vaguely realized what was truly beneficial for the race, but her emotions could not face it calmly. Once she took that step, there was no turning back. All the pressure and risks would be shouldered by her alone, and even she could not make up her mind. In terms of facing fate, she was inferior to this human woman. At this moment, the phone rang. The caller ID showed that it was Roland. Valkyries hesitated for a long time before finally picking up the call. What's the matter? If it's a one-sided fabrication of the frontline battle report, then forget it. Without obtaining confirmation from Haxord, I will not. I just want to ask, what exactly is the matter with the floating island? The other party's first sentence stunned her. Rose Coffee House. After listening to Roland's complete explanation, Valkyries leaned on the chair in exhaustion and gently exhaled. Deity of gods, what? She looked at him in silence, hoping to see something from his eyes. But the results told her that it was not a premeditated deception. Roland was completely unaware of what he had discovered. The exposure of the deity of gods was merely a coincidence. Such coincidences happened all the time and did not affect the situation much. As the trump card of the race, the higher-ups probably wished for the humans to witness the miracle created by magic power earlier. After all, even if they were to witness its existence, it would only increase the fear and despair of the enemy. But Valkyrie's thoughts ran deeper. The deity of gods was supposed to be the ultimate weapon against the Sky-Sea realm, but for it to suddenly appear on the Western Front, it could only mean one thing. The situation on the Western Front had reached a difficult stage. If not for that, the king would never have agreed to use the deity of gods against the humans. It was a dead chain of logic. Only when the Western Front suffered a huge defeat would the higher-ups use the deity of gods to salvage the situation. It was also for this reason that the witches had the opportunity to meet the deity of gods. This meant that the battle report Roland had previously sent was true, and indirectly proved his sincerity. Unless Roland had heard of the existence of the deity of gods from another senior lord. But the possibility of that was slim. If another senior lord was willing to cooperate, there was no need for him to put on such a show. The pain in her heart made Valkyrie clench her fists. But her rationality prevented her from deceiving herself. Her feet seemed to have landed on the edge of a cliff, and there was only a single wooden bridge in front of her. Her conflicted emotions nearly engulfed her. Just as the overwhelming pressure was about to overwhelm her, the scene of Fei Yuhan rebuking everyone suddenly surfaced in her mind. Through the conference room door, she had clearly heard the other party's unyielding rebuttal. Fearing the terrifying future and giving up on moving forward is nothing but a coward's way of doing things. Even if we fail in the end, we will do our best. Disregard everything, to move forward. Valkyrie stared at Roland for a long time before closing her eyes. What you saw was the deity of gods. She repeated. That is the trump card our race has prepared to ascend to the Sky-Sea realm, and also the absorption of the underground civilization's inheritance. Hundreds of years ago, our race had the thought of breaking free from the red mist, which is the restriction of the red mist. The most direct method is to allow the red mist birth tower to move freely, but it is also the most difficult to achieve. Just moving the gigantic tower is difficult enough, not to mention the god's stone mine at the bottom of the tower. It was only when Mask completely grasped the magic power technology of the underground civilization and improved upon it that the plan ushered in a glimmer of hope. I am not clear of the specific changes, but its essence is to transform the birth tower into a gigantic magic power core, and use it to increase the effects of the core's ability. As long as there is sufficient magic power, the large-scale phenomenon it causes is comparable to a miracle. Thus, the king bestowed upon it the name, Deity of Gods. Valkyries took that step. Chapter 1393. This time, it was Roland's turn to be stunned. The long silence from the other party made him think that his inquiry would be fruitless. He didn't expect the King of Nightmares to explain the origin of the floating island in such great detail. He couldn't react for a moment due to the stark contrast. What's with that expression? Valkyries opened her eyes and said angrily, I did not betray the race, I just agree with Heftali's view, the battle of divine will cannot be exchanged for the continuation of the race. Continuing it will only make us God's pawns, so, stopping it is the right thing to do. That was clearly his idea. Roland subconsciously scratched the back of his head. 1,000 years ago, the Transformer was still unable to connect to the realm of mind, so how could she know so many details? But no matter how slow he was, he knew that this was the time to go along with the other party's words. That's right, you've finally understood this point. He retracted his surprised expression and tried his best to pretend to be generous. He extended his hand and said, even though God has already noticed us, I believe that it's not too late. Valkyries did not respond to his handshake. Before that, I want to ask you a question. What? If everything is as the oracles said in the end, how do you plan to deal with the relationship between my race and the humans? The Nightmare Lord's expression was extremely solemn. Roland realized that this question would determine everything that would happen next. The fact that she could ask such a crucial question meant that she had indeed begun to consider the possibility of cooperation, as well as the true path for the future of her race. He even had a faint premonition that if the answer was unacceptable to her, she might forcefully leave the dream world, even if it meant death. To be honest, I haven't thought about it yet, Roland replied slowly after a moment of contemplation. Valkyries frowned and said coldly, so you were just saying it in the beginning. Deep down, you did not believe that I would cooperate with you at all, right? No, I did think about it, but this matter is a little too complicated. He smiled bitterly. This answer was really not up to standard, but he didn't want to come up with something nice first. The other party wasn't a fool, and drawing a picture wasn't his forte. Rather than making a fool out of himself, he might as well tell the truth. The war between humans and demons has lasted for thousands of years, and this hatred isn't something that can be erased in a short period of time. It's almost impossible to turn reality into a dream. For now, the only method I can think of is to completely separate the two of you and have you leave the human world forever. Where to? This is a problem that we will have to consider in detail in the future. However, the outside world is so big. I guess there must be a place where we can stay. The two stared at each other for a long time. It was not until the steam from the coffee dissipated that Valkyries broke the silence. If your answer was immediate and comprehensive, it would probably be a trap. But now, I think you really intend to do that. Not having thought about it is a qualified answer. You can think of it that way. The King of Nightmares let out a long sigh. I admit that this is a one-log bridge over the abyss. Whether it's going forward or down, it's unpredictable. But even if the hope is slim, I have to try, because, in the entire race, I'm the only one who can do this. Roland noticed that when she said this, she involuntarily clenched her fists. Obviously, her heart wasn't as determined as her words. But he also knew that this wasn't an easy decision to make. For most people, falling into the abyss was the norm. When there was no difference in the outcome, giving up was actually a form of relief. Don't be too complacent. Valkyries glanced at him. The god who planned the Battle of Divine will definitely not ignore your actions. If the entire world was created by him, I don't think you have much chance of winning. Therefore, the final outcome is likely to be the complete destruction of both races, and not a single trace will be left. I think so too. Roland said frankly as he extended his hand towards her. So we are all on the same one-log bridge. This time, the King of Nightmares slowly extended her right arm and shook his. Then, let's quickly resolve the matter with the deity of gods. Seeing that they had come to an agreement, Roland picked up the phone and ordered a new Peninsula coffee for her. He then asked impatiently, is there any way to contact Haxord? It's not a bad idea to get him to transfer the floating island back, or simply let the First Army station there and cooperate with us to head to the Bottomless Land. It's too late. Valkyries shook her head. What? I previously wanted to let Haxord enter the dream world for two reasons. Firstly, I hoped to obtain information from the outside world through him, and secondly, to increase the possibility of persuading him. But I never expected the situation to be worse than I expected. He believed in Osruk's suggestion, and the deity of gods was probably requested by him from the king. The situation has developed to such an extent that it's basically irreversible. You mean, don't tell me you think that just by relying on Sky Lord, you can control the trump card of the race? Once the deity of gods reaches the Western Front, it will be impossible to get him to return. Not to mention Haxord, even I won't be able to convince the king and all the senior lords. Valkyries went straight to the point. Furthermore, Sky Lord's request to transfer the deity of gods must have put him under immense pressure. Even if we try to rope him in, the chances of success are minuscule. In other words, I'm the only one who agrees to cooperate, at least for now. For now. Roland acutely caught the hidden meaning in her words. You have other ways to influence Haxord? Valkyries did not deny it. I understand him. It's impossible to get him to stand out and bear all the risks, to defy the king's orders when the road ahead is unclear. But it's not difficult to warn him to avoid danger. Generally speaking, when it comes to its own safety, it's always the most concerned. Roland could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth. To put it nicely, it was caution, but to put it bluntly, it was cowardice. I will write a letter to get him to stay away from the deity of gods. This is the only thing I can do. As long as you can pass the message, he will most likely do as you say. But the impending war is unavoidable. Other than defeating the deity of gods, you have no other choice. Valkyries enunciated each word clearly. Only by shooting him down will Haxord realize that the battle of divine will not work, and the chances of me persuading him will increase significantly. Therefore, he has to live until the deity of gods is destroyed. That is the basis of our cooperation. She shifted her gaze, preventing Roland from seeing her expression. If you can't do that, then treat it as though I didn't say anything. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1394. After waking up from the dream world, Roland immediately called for Tilly. I have a basic understanding of the floating island's detailed information. It is indeed a creation of the demons, and they call it the deity of gods. Tilly was stunned. It had only been a few hours since she brought the information, so where did he get it from? In short, I have some special channels. Roland was naturally aware of her doubts, but the matter of the Nightmare Lord being trapped in the dream world was too difficult to explain, so he chose to skip over it. The information might be biased, so it can only be used as a reference. The actual situation will have to be verified by you. Following that, he briefly explained the origins of the deity of gods. So, it's actually a floating city? Tilly asked in surprise. Yes. Roland nodded. But it's much bigger than a city. According to Valkyries, the combination of the obelisk that produced the red mist and the magic power core produced an astonishing effect. Although he did not participate in the creation of the deity of gods, he knew the entire plan like the back of his hand. In order to obtain a stable core parameter, the demons had conducted numerous experiments. Among them, the experiment in Tabnit City 100 years ago nearly destroyed the entire city. The violent magic power instantly tore apart the ground, uprooting the buildings and shattering them in the process. Countless inferior demons were flung into the air before crashing to the ground and turning into meat paste. In order to seal off the news, the king ultimately classified it as a magic power accident. Despite the heavy losses, not only did the plan not stop, it even sped up. Other than the battle of divine will approaching, the demons urgently needed to break free from the restrictions of the red mist was another reason. The disaster made the higher-ups realize that the plan was not impossible. The deity of gods was their final achievement. The magic power reached thousands of meters underground and lifted up the land within a radius of tens of kilometers to ensure its basic stability. From the sky, it looked like a floating continent, but from below, it looked like an inverted mountain peak that was wide at the top and narrow at the bottom. By adjusting the magic power of the core instrument, the deity of gods could not only float up and down, it could also move in the sky like a ship. Because of this characteristic, the upper echelons of the devils viewed it as the only way to counterattack the Sky-Sea realm. Once they seized the human territory, they would gain another round of rest and reorganization. When that time came, there would undoubtedly be more deities of gods rising into the sky, bringing a large number of mad demons to descend upon the Sky-Sea realm. This information also made Roland realize that the other party's progress in the past 400 years was also not to be underestimated. They had embarked on a completely different technological path than humans, but that did not mean that they were the laggards. Magic power was undoubtedly a power with great potential, and it could be seen from the deity of gods. Regardless of whether it was tearing apart the earth, tossing thousands of buildings into the air, or raising a piece of land into the air, the amount of energy converted was extremely astonishing. Nowadays, the devil's experiments were more inclined towards empirical theories, but quantitative changes often brought about qualitative changes. Once these experiences were transformed into systematic scientific theories, their strength would definitely advance by leaps and bounds. This applied to humans as well. After the war was over, it was necessary to establish the discipline of magic as soon as possible. Even if he knew nothing about magic, he could at least guide future generations to research this power. This is the essence of science. As long as anything existed, it would be an object of observation. Although I don't know where you got your information from, it does sound like it. Tilly said thoughtfully. Then, have you thought of a way to deal with the deity of gods? Firstly, this thing is practically unafraid of any artillery fire. The First Army should prioritize preserving their strength. Secondly, the aerial knight will be the key to the upcoming battle. Roland said slowly. It can't be said that there are no methods to deal with it, but whether it will succeed is still an unknown. Against a moving piece of land, even using the glory of the sun might not achieve the desired effect. This point had long been proven in history. In Operation Crossroads, 2 plutonium bombs with a yield of approximately 23,000 tons were detonated in the air and underwater. The former was unable to sink a large ship that was more than 300 meters away from the epicenter of the explosion, while the latter's damage range was less than a kilometer. From this, it could be seen that against a large target, the might of nuclear weapons would be greatly reduced. Furthermore, the deity of gods was much larger than a ship. It was akin to using a prototype bomb to bombard the impassable mountain range. 100 of them would probably only be able to blow a corner off. Although the yield could solve all problems, it could not be solved because the yield was insufficient, but with Neverwinter's current technology, a yield of 10,000 tons was probably the limit. Therefore, other than using the power of the glory of the sun, he had to formulate a feasible plan to complete the breaking dawn strike. The core of the deity of gods was undoubtedly the obelisk. According to Valkyrie's description, it was located in the center of the city. In order to facilitate the accumulation of red mist, the inferior demons would constantly dig deep pits around the obelisk. It was also the main work of the magicless demons. The red mist that was heavier than air would gradually fall to the bottom and condense into a red mist pond, which would slowly expand into a lake over the long years. This made Roland recall the demon city he had seen in his memory fragments. Countless towers were built along the cliffs of the pit, and the pit was filled with crystallized red mist. After 1,000 years of accumulation, the depth of the lake was astonishing. The immense pressure caused the density of the red mist at the bottom to increase, to the point that it turned from a liquid to a crystalline state. The city that was transformed into the deity of gods was also an old city, and the red mist lake existed at the bottom of the obelisk, which was obviously the breakthrough point. Valkyrie's red mist theory also verified the experiments and conjectures of Lily and the others. The red mist was actually a mist formed by microscopic lifeforms. These lifeforms were extremely small and difficult to observe with a low magnification microscope. At the same time, they possessed magic power and would cause severe backlash to magic creatures other than the demons. This was also the reason why Lily was unable to use her ability to control the red mist. The red mist had many biological characteristics, such as its fear of fire. Under high temperatures, it would rapidly escape, and macroscopically, it would accelerate its decomposition. When the temperature rose to a certain degree, it would ignite. This was no different from other carbon-based lifeforms being ignited. An ignition point of 800 to 900 degrees was already considered outstanding. The only difference was that it was extremely small, and when mixed with air, it would ignite. Iron Axe had once incinerated the heavens in the Tusk city of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. What he wanted to do now was to ignite the entire firmament. The combustion of the red mist would rapidly decrease its energy and deplete the surrounding oxygen, so the starting temperature had to be sufficiently high. In theory, a large number of incendiary bombs could achieve the same effect, but to transport hundreds and thousands of barrels of napalm to the deity of gods, he needed a squadron of bombers. Regardless of the quantity of the glory of the sun, its core temperature would not be discounted. The only problem that needed to be solved was how to pass through the defense line guarded by a large number of demons and devil beasts, arrive above the obelisk, and deliver the bombs with precision. As long as there's a way. Tilly's expression seemed to have calmed down. Regardless of the possibility of success, everyone will work together to make it a reality. Leave this to us, brother. I will bring the good news back to the headquarters. The feeling of being fully trusted made Roland's heart surge with warmth. He paused for a moment, and after calming himself down, he picked up a quill and wrote on a piece of paper. Right, I have something that I need you to deliver to Miss Edith Kant. After he finished writing, he did not place the letter into the envelope, but handed it directly to Tilly. The latter took a glance and could not help but frown. What's written on it? The words of the demons, Roland replied calmly. Come read M. Chapter 1395. How ugly. Tilly curled her lips. Roland smiled awkwardly but politely. If the characters of the four kingdoms were as twisted as earthworms, then the characters of the demons were more complicated, to the point that they looked like witchcraft symbols. In addition, he had copied it from memory and was not familiar with every stroke, which made it look even more messy. Only God knew if Haxord could understand the meaning of these words. He had also raised doubts to Valkyries, but was resolutely refuted. She believed that it was more feasible for a human to copy it. This proved that she was not lost in the realm of mind, and could also show her own predicament. This was the only way to convey the message. If he directly copied her handwriting, it would be easy for the cautious Haxord to suspect that it was a trap. After all, if she could send a letter personally, why not just leave the realm of mind? Then what's the content of the letter? Ask the Sky Lord to avoid the upcoming battlefield, so the general staff needs to find a way to send this letter to the demons. Brother, are you okay? Tilly was shocked. Why would the enemy's senior lord listen to you? It won't take much effort anyway. Roland pretended to be indifferent. What if it succeeds? In fact, he had asked the Nightmare Lord the same question. Her answer was that the lifespan of a senior demon was usually hundreds of years. During this period, their habits and culture would change significantly. Therefore, words would leave a distinct personal mark, which was more reliable than any coat of arms or insignia. According to Roland's understanding, it was probably similar to seeing Martian words and thinking of people born in the 90s. All right. Tilly put away the letter helplessly. Since it's your request. Just as she was about to leave, the phone in the North Slope laboratory on her desk suddenly rang. Roland picked up the phone. The caller was Anna. After listening to what Tilly had to say, Roland slightly raised the corner of his mouth and gestured to Tilly. You don't have to hurry on your journey today. Rest in the castle for a night. I happen to have something new for you. In the lab, Tilly saw the revolutionary new product that Roland mentioned, 2 small square wooden boxes. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were boxes. Not only were there obvious gaps in the covers and loose leaf openings on the sides, but the overall size was also about 30 centimeters, as if it could be carried directly in one's hand. This size was a far cry from those amazing mechanical creations from before, and it even seemed a little less imposing. The only difference between them and ordinary boxes was that they were covered with a shiny metal plate with some knobs and buttons arranged on it. This is mobile radio station. Anna took the initiative to explain, it's equivalent to a miniature telegraph tower. The advantage is that it can directly transmit sound, and of course, the distance is much shorter. I see. Wait a minute. Tilly was stunned. She looked at Roland and asked, is this the new communication tool you were talking about? Although the other party had painted a big picture for her a long time ago, she did not expect the final product to be so exquisite. Even if it could be installed on the plane, it should have taken up most of the space in the belly of the plane. After all, with the size of the tower, to be able to shrink it to the size of the fire of heaven was already an incredible feat. Roland seemed to have seen through her doubts and reached out to open the lid of the wooden box. A cluster of intertwining circuits and components immediately appeared in front of her. Although she did not understand the principle, Tilly realized that this thing was fundamentally different from the mechanical devices of the past. It can be considered the world's first true electronic device. Although the electric motors, lights, telephones, and transmitters used electricity, it was essentially a simple conversion of electricity into other forms for release. Roland said, and it has an independent circuit system that can use electricity to control electricity. This is equivalent to replacing the gears, screws, and bearings with electronic signals. Its current size is already quite large. Are you blaming me for not being good enough? Anna glanced at him. Ahem, Of course not, Roland quickly coughed twice. It's the design bureau's blueprint that isn't exquisite enough. It's all thanks to Sister Anna working late into the night that the test sample could be completed so quickly, Lucia, who was his assistant, added. The main problem is that the vacuum tube has to be maintained and many components have to be inserted. Without the black fire, it would be difficult to guarantee the success rate. The core of the radio station was the vacuum tube that combined amplification, detection, and oscillation. It was also the symbol of mankind entering the electronic era. Roland naturally knew how high the threshold was. The pile of shiny scrap outside the North Slope laboratory was proof. Furthermore, it was difficult for him to provide guidance in the field of electricity like before. Most of the content could only be slowly explored by Anna herself. Reality also proved that his previous idea of sending shortwave radio stations to his class was nothing more than a beautiful fantasy. In the future, Anna's work focus would definitely be on large bombers, and it would already be quite good if she could find the time to create enough electronic tubes for the aerial knights to use. Can I try? Tilly asked impatiently. Of course you can. Anna nodded with a smile. After a while, the three of them began to talk in the laboratory, and the room was filled with a cheerful atmosphere. Thanks to the extremely clean electromagnetic background of this era, the ground communication range of the prototype radio station could easily reach more than 2 kilometers, and it would undoubtedly be even farther in the air. Although the radio station would receive obvious interference when the spark transmitter was communicating, except for extremely urgent messages, the sender could choose to send the telegram at a fixed time to avoid the Air Knight's action time. There was not too much conflict between the two. In Roland's eyes, the success of the radio station was even more important to the Air Knight than the newly developed 20mm machine gun. Real-time communication would greatly expand the range of activities of the flying formation, so that all kinds of air combat tactics could be put into play. With close and precise cooperation, the combat strength of the team would be improved as a whole. It could be said that the Air Knight that could achieve this could be regarded as a real air force. Tilly clearly saw this point as well, and after ending the experience, she unwillingly urged them to use more radio stations instead of a dedicated plane. The next morning, she brought the 2 prototypes and boarded the Phoenix. When the orange-red figure disappeared into the white horizon, the morning light suddenly pierced through the clouds and scattered thousands of gentle light ribbons. The months of the demons that had lasted for nearly 4 months had finally ended. At the same time, the crimson moon hanging high above their heads instantly disappeared, as though it had never existed. But Roland knew that this did not mean the end of the battle of divine will. Hundreds of years ago, the demons would take advantage of the crimson moon to erect the obelisk, and quietly wait for it to grow into a towering pillar. Only after they had established a firm foothold would they launch an official attack. The battle of destiny would often reveal its true ferocity at this moment. Today, the humans were once again standing at the same checkpoint. But this time, their appearance was completely different from the past. He believed that history would not repeat itself. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1396. Let go of that which I'm having a party with my friends today, so I'm taking a day off. Currently typing, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 1397. The Ridge of the Continent, the Deity of Gods. Sky Lord passed through the tower and strode into the underground modified karst cave. Before the city was officially crowned with a deity's name, it was one of the most famous cities in the Blackstone region, with a history of nearly 1,000 years. This was not the first time he had visited the place, and the complicated karst cave structure did not cause him any trouble. The only thing that annoyed him was Senior Lord Mask, Nasipel. My lord is currently conducting an important experiment. May I ask if you have communicated with my lord beforehand? At the entrance of the experimental grounds, a junior demon blocked Haxord's path. As Mask's servant, he had clearly chosen the same path as the senior lord he served. His 2 heads were forcefully connected by a magic stone device, making him look deformed and ugly. Scram! Haxord did not wish to speak nonsense with him. He raised his hand and knocked the servant to the ground. If it were a combat-type junior demon, Haxord might have needed to spend some effort, but Mask had gone through a thorough path of modification. The magic stones fused with him were mostly unsuitable for combat, so the abilities of the junior demon that followed him were obvious. Perhaps sensing that the Sky Lord was suppressing his anger, the attendant tactfully shut his mouth. Haxord pushed open the heavy stone door and walked into the experimental grounds without turning back. He did not open the distortion door and directly attack Mask, which was already the greatest respect he could muster. Behind the door was an extremely spacious cave. Tens of thousands of stones of lighting were embedded in the rock ceiling, resembling a night sky filled with stars. Beneath his feet was a dense cluster of inferior demons. They outnumbered the magic stones, and most of them were in the form of worms. They were caged up like livestock, receiving repeated stimulation from the magic power core. Haxord could not help but frown. Even among the inferior demons, they were the most useless. Their lack of limbs meant that they were unable to work, and their extremely low intelligence made it difficult to tame them. But an unexpected discovery from the carrier experiments was probably due to their primitive and simple meridians. They had the highest success rate when fusing with foreign objects, making them ideal hosts. Of course, not every inferior worm could live long enough to resonate with the growth god stone. The dead ones would become the food of the next batch of inferior worms. Only those that successfully adapted to the symbiotic state could become qualified weapons. Naturally, Sky Lord would not sympathize with these lowly beings who could not be communicated with. Compared to their useless selves in the past, they could at least contribute to the race now. It was dissatisfied with Mask's twisted sense of humor. The modification process could have been carried out in a closed karst cave, but the other party deliberately set it up in the most eye-catching area. For suspension bridges crossed the heads of tens of thousands of inferior demons from 4 directions and connected to the thick stone pillar in the center of the cave. Every time Lucien wanted to enter the center of the experimental field, he was forced to admire the work of the other party. The writhing bodies of the inferior demons, their painful screams, the pungent smell of their excrement, and the rotten skin of all kinds of failed products filled the entire cave with a foul atmosphere. No ordinary member of the race would enjoy staying in such a dark and negative place, but Mask had deliberately set up the experimental field on top of the stone pillar. Haxord even suspected that his brain had suffered some sort of damage during the fusion process, causing him to become so unreasonable. After passing through the suspension bridge, Haxord found Nasipel in the modification room on the top floor. Seeing the scene in front of him, Sky Lord was instantly infuriated. He saw Senior Lord Mask circling around the remains of the iron bird that his subordinates had dragged back and sizing them up. Lying around him were several human nobles whose fate was unknown. The only one who was still alive was being held in Mask's hands. His face was contorted from fright and there were obvious wet marks on his robe. "Nasipel," he roared. "Who allowed you to touch the people I brought? Even if you want to conduct experiments, you should have gotten my permission first." It was no wonder that he was so furious. He had painstakingly transported the mainland migrants to the Great Rift Valley before sending them to the deity of gods. It was all for the sake of preventing Greycastle from expanding its potential for war, and at the same time, replenishing the city's laborers. It could be said to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. He never expected that just as he brought a batch of humans back to the deity of gods, a worried Everwinter noble would come knocking on his door, saying that a few of his companions had been abducted by the guards and their whereabouts were unknown. This would undoubtedly destroy the stable order that he had painstakingly established. What made Haxord the most unhappy was that it was fine to capture commoners for experiments, but the other party had to capture the nobles, and the latter was the key to controlling the lower-class citizens. Without the nobles' appeals, the amount of effort and time Haxord had to expend to control the tens of thousands of people would have been several times greater. "Lord Haxord, save me!" The surviving nobles cried out as though they had seen their savior. "Ah! So it's your excellency, Sky Lord." Mask turned around and said indifferently, "I have to say that this is a misunderstanding. I do like to fuse essences, but that doesn't include the worms. I have already obtained their most outstanding parts 600 years ago. He took off a mask from his head and revealed the face of a female human beneath it. It should have belonged to a certain witch, but it had now become a part of him. And there were more than 10 such masks. It was easy to imagine how horrifying it would be if all of them were removed. According to Nasapel, the brain was the spirit of wisdom and was more important than any other part of the body. And the more brains one had, the higher the efficiency of one's thinking. Hence, the characteristic of a powerful race was to have at least 2 heads. This way, they would be able to consider problems while resting, maximizing the use of time. But in Haxord's eyes, only ugly demonic beasts and Sky Sea realm monsters would have such an appearance. An indiscernible purple light flashed as the mask in Mask's hand was instantly sliced into 2. Following that, a line of blood slowly split open on the female's face as dark blue blood flowed out. Nasapel probably did not expect Haxord to make a move, causing his imposing manner to suffer a setback. He dropped the noble in his hand and clutched his injured face as he retreated a few steps. Sky Lord, why you, are you crazy? You actually attacked a senior lord for a worm. Don't forget that I am the creator of the deity of gods, and the hope for our race to win the battle of divine will. Could it be that, you wish to betray the king? Seeing the other party's panicked expression, Haxord felt a tinge of delight surge in his heart. Ever since becoming the commander of the Western Front, he had never encountered anything that went his way. The Nightmare Lord was mysteriously lost, and the army was ultimately unable to break through the humans' defensive line. Now, even after painstakingly plotting for the race to win, Mask was obstructing him from behind. It was preposterous. It was impossible for Nasapel to not know that he was the one who had brought the humans to the deity of gods. To abduct them without his permission was undoubtedly a brazen offense. It could only be said that after a series of failures, Haxord had been belittled by others. This was not the king's presiding holy see, and Senior Lord Mask was not the magic slayer. If he did not teach the other party a lesson, he might really think that he was a pushover. What was the point of emphasizing that having more brains was an advantage? In the face of the disparity in strength, having more brains was useless. He wanted to let the other party know who was the commander of the Western Front Army. If you are loyal to the king, you should know what to do and what not to do. Haxord retracted the sharp distortion door and said coldly, "Be it to me or the race, these people are of great use. I hope you understand this point." The 2 senior lords looked at each other for a moment before Mask admitted defeat. "I was negligent. I will seek your opinion first next time." "That's good." Haxord nodded. He did not plan to force the other party. After all, the deity of gods required a few advanced humans who were familiar with the magic power core to control it, and they were basically Nasapel's subordinates. At the same time, the symbiotic demon weapons needed to be manufactured by the other party. He could not do anything to Mask, or else the king would be the first to not spare him. My lord. Oh, it's great to be able to see you." The noble scrambled to Sky Lord's side and hugged his thigh tightly. "Let's talk about this later." Haxord swept a glance at him before looking at Mask. "Since it's not for the fusion, why did you bring the humans here?" Mask curled his lips at the Iron Bird's wreckage. "I just wanted to ask them how this thing's core works." Haxord followed his gaze and saw an extremely intricate piece of equipment placed in front of the Iron Bird's head. Vertex M. Chapter 1398. Core. Haxord walked to the side of the machine, bent down, and casually fiddled with the disassembled metal pieces. He quickly discovered that there were details amidst the coarse parts. From the bumpy outer shell to the hidden structure within, it was nearly impossible to see everything with a single glance. Any cylindrical object he picked up contained tens or even hundreds of parts. It was far more complicated than a flintlock. "You mean, the Iron Bird relies on it to fly," Mask said with certainty. "Wait, are you saying that the thing that is faster than the Bogle beasts is powered by a pile of inanimate objects?" Haxord frowned. As a senior lord who had faced the iron bird, he could clearly see that the reason why it could fly was not because of the vibrations of its wings, but because of the buzzing blades on its head. In a certain sense, it was somewhat similar to a windmill, except that the latter was propelled by the wind, while the iron bird actively produced wind. However, the reason why the blades could maintain high speeds for such a long period of time was a question that Sky Lord could not understand. It was impossible to achieve this with human strength alone. Therefore, he subconsciously attributed it to a magic sigil or some other magic stone system that automatically released magic stones. This was the only way to explain why the iron bird could fly into the sky under the control of a male without the need for a witch. But now, Mask was telling him that the iron bird was powered by a pile of inanimate objects made of metal. Unbelievable, right? I think so too. Upon discussing a topic that interested him, Nasapel suddenly became spirited. He extended a slender finger and dug into the metal bucket before handing it to Sky Lord. Do you want to have a taste? Haxord looked at the pitch-black stain on his fingertip and said coldly, do you want to have a taste of your broken hand? Ahem. There are some things that can only be left with a deeper impression after personally experiencing it. Nasapel sheepishly retracted his finger and placed it in his mouth. A portion of it has a charred taste, but it also has a slight fragrance. This thing is most likely used to contain flames. Fire is unable to power the iron bird. That depends on what kind of fire it is. If it burns intensely enough, it might be able to do so. Mask retorted. You've also seen the fire sticks that the Zergs use. I've taken them apart and examined them carefully. Their nature is to burn, but because of their extremely fast speed, it looks like an explosion. Since this kind of power can push the crossbow out of the barrel, it should be able to push the oars as well. The explosion of the flaming twig happens in an instant. If it's really as you said, then we have to continuously add flammable substances into the iron bucket, and the speed of adding flammable substances would have to exceed thousands of times per breath to reach the speed of the blade's rotation. Theoretically speaking, this is impossible. Sky Lord poured cold water on them. This is also something I don't understand. Nasapel directly admitted to it. That's why I called these worms over to listen to their opinions. Who knew that their stupidity is comparable to the inferior demons outside? I thought that the worms were deliberately hiding it and used some tricks, but it turns out that they are truly clueless. At this point, Great Monarch Masquerade danced with excitement. Can you believe it? The creator of this thing in front of them was actually from the same race as these bugs. The logic behind the machinery is now laid out in front of us, but they are completely clueless about it. They even said that it was a trick of a fallen witch, so I used too much force in my agitation, my lord. The noble's face turned pale when Nasapel glared at him. He leaned against the wall and trembled. Now I can understand why you don't treat humans as bugs. But I have to say, these fellows you brought are still bugs, and the lowest kind. Mask turned to look at Haxord. Right, I heard that the iron birds and fire sticks were created by Greycastle. Can you capture a few Greycastle craftsmen for me? I really want to see if their brain structure has changed compared to the bugs. If so, fusing with a human brain might not be a bad idea. Enough. Haxord interrupted. I'm not here to listen to you. Once you obtain their legacy shards, all your questions will naturally be answered. The key is to win the war. The deity of gods will enter the human territories in a week's time. I do not wish for you to give me any more trouble. Creating more symbiotic demons is your entire mission, do you understand? Also, do not touch these humans again. Mask fell silent, and after a moment, he spread out his hands. Of course. Sky Lord gave him a deep look before grabbing the surviving nobles and leaving the modification room. After the stone door closed for a long time, Nasapel shook his head slightly. You are only at this level, Haxord. Mysteries are the key to unlocking the essence of truth, but you are not the least bit interested in it. He took out a new mask from his robes and slowly placed it on the witch's head. Magic power is not the only rule of the world, and the battle of divine will is even more so. Even if you obtain everything from the defeated through the legacy shards, not everyone will be able to reach the peak in the end. This is the reason why I can create symbiotic demons, while you can only rush about on the battlefield. You are completely unaware of the meaning contained within these metallic creations. Senior Lord Mask turned to stare at the wreckage of the Iron Bird and muttered. Humans used explosions to propel a huge object, giving it an unprecedented enlightenment, which was the transformation of power. It was very common for stable objects to evolve into unstable objects, but it was the first time it saw a stable rotation achieved by using unstable and intense combustion. From the explosion to flight, there had to be some sort of internal connection that caused the transformation of power. Since the two could be reversed, did it mean that they were essentially the same? What about magic power? In the past, the race had never thought about the manifestation of magic power. What it manifested was what it was. But now that he thought about it, could magic power undergo a similar transformation? If you were to use the magic power that raised the deity of gods and directly transform it into the power of an explosion, how astonishing would the power be? It was as though he had seen a brand new path opening up in front of him. If he could grasp this profound mystery, not to mention the Sky Lord, even the king, would be nothing. Knowledge was the strongest power in the world. I want to know. I want to know the profound mystery of the humans. Nasapel raised his head and could not help but laugh strangely. Hearing the faint laughter behind him, Haxord turned his head away in disgust. My lord, thank goodness you came. The noble on his shoulder said with a tearful face. The others had holes opened up in their heads by that monster. I was nearly the next, I know. Don't worry, it's all over. After he unloaded the noble, he did not let him leave. Instead, he grabbed him by the collar and lifted him over the railing of the drawbridge. Wait, Sky Lord, what are you doing? Looking at the terrifying worm trough beneath his feet, the noble panicked. No. No. Haxord did not reply. He raised his hand and tossed the surviving noble. With a blood-curdling scream, he fell more than 10 meters into the hole. Faced with the sudden appearance of food, the inferior demons swarmed forward and responded to the gift with their swaying bodies. He needed a stable and controllable labor force. The noble who had seen the experimental field and Mask's true appearance was obviously not one of them. Even he felt that Nasapel was no different from a monster, much less these humans. Rather than letting him go back and cry about what happened to him, it was better to shut him up here forever. Although this would bring about some trouble, it was better than not being able to clean up the mess. Back at the human's temporary residence, Marwayne Parker was the first to welcome him. My lord. I wonder what happened to those who were abducted. I've already confirmed that they were captured because they had a secret communication with Greycastle. As the person in charge of intelligence was someone else, the news reached me a little later. Haxord patiently pacified him. But thankfully, I arrived in time. According to your traditions, those people were not executed but were instead escorted to Sky City. After the war ends, they can be exchanged for their freedom with ransom or other prices. There's another piece of good news. The remaining nobles have passed the investigation. Such an incident will not happen again. Is that so? Marwayne heaved a sigh of relief. I see. Thank you for your care. It's all right. As long as you do your best to complete the mission I give you, there will definitely be a place for you in the human world in the future. Of course, of course. Marwayne suddenly took out a letter from his bosom. By the way, my lord, when you went to the inner city, someone passed me this letter. It's said to be specially addressed to you. Even though there's a high chance of misinformation, since I've brought it into the miracle, I think it's better for you to take a look. Oh. Haxord unfolded the letter and his pupils constricted. Chapter 1399. Without a doubt, the letter was written in the language of the race, but it looked extremely awkward, as though it was deliberately copied. But upon closer inspection, one would discover its uniqueness. Be it the formation of words or the use of sentences, it had a distinct style of the ancient language, and was definitely not the language used by the current race. Haxord felt a sense of déjà vu. After calming his heart and recalling for a long time, a sense of shock and fear suddenly surged in his heart. Where did you get this letter from? Sky Lord grabbed Marwain and asked loudly. He was so agitated that he momentarily forgot to maintain his high and mighty attitude in front of the humans. Marwain was startled, and after a while, he stammered, My lord, I'm not too sure. The person who delivered the letter is currently at the miracle. I'll call him over to see you, go quickly. Haxord roared as he pressed his face against Marwain's. Not daring to raise his hand to wipe his saliva, Marwain ran towards the human gathering point on all fours. Damn it! Haxord knew that he had lost his composure, but he could not control his emotions. The handwriting clearly belonged to the Nightmare Lord, Valkyries. Even though the imitation was rather clumsy, to the point that Haxord was unable to immediately identify the owner of the letter, Haxord would definitely recognize it after reading it a few times. It was a sentence that came from over 1,000 years ago, a sentence that was commonly used by the enlighteners of the race. At the same time, it had a bit of a human narrative style. The number of higher ascendants that could survive from the first battle of divine will could be counted on one's fingers, and to be able to blend in with the human language, other than the Nightmare Lord who had stayed in the Cloud School for a long time, there was no other possibility. Valkyries still retained his consciousness. But how is that possible? He had already been trapped in the realm of mind for a few months. If this was considered inconceivable, then what was even more inconceivable was the contents of the letter. The battle of divine will is a trap that keeps repeating itself. The realm of mind is in the bottomless land at the end of the ridge of the continent. The deity of gods isn't safe. Haxord was at a loss for a moment, but there was a huge amount of information contained in those few short sentences, causing Haxord to be at a loss. There were too many questions in his mind, but none of them could be answered. How did Valkyries maintain her consciousness in the middle of a turbulent sea of mana? How did it deliver the message? Was this letter really written by Valkyries? Should he report this to the king? Sky Lord. I have brought the person you wanted. Just as Haxord was in a daze, Marwain's careful voice came from beside him. It turned around and glanced at the two coldly. I want to know everything about the origin of the letter. Tell me everything you know. 15 minutes later. After listening to the details, Haxord understood that it was impossible to trace the origin of the letter from a human. This letter that contained a shocking secret was handed directly to a noble by a migrant. And the migrant only wanted a few golden dragons, so he took on the role of a messenger without thinking about the meaning of the letter itself. Even if Haxord pursued the matter, it would not yield any results. Regardless of whether it was true or not, to use such a crude method to deliver an extremely important letter, should Haxord say that the other party had astonishing guts, or that Valkyries had entrusted the wrong person? There's nothing for you to do here. Haxord waved his hand. Do not take the initiative to reveal the letter to anyone. If there are any more such letters in the future, you have to hand it to me immediately, understand? Yes, we will definitely do as you say. The two nobles hurriedly bowed, indicating that they would not let him down. After sending the humans away, Sky Lord looked towards the north and fell into deep thought. For some reason, he found himself unexpectedly heaving a sigh of relief. Ever since the day the Nightmare Lord was lost, the pressure on his shoulders had quietly lessened. Probably, no one could ignore her influence in the race. Be it from a practical or psychological point of view, Haxord was more inclined to believe that the letter was written by Valkyries. It was extremely difficult to imitate a person's style. Even if humans mastered the race's language, it was impossible to forge such a letter. As for why it was not written by the Nightmare Lord herself, the only explanation was that she was still trapped in the realm of mind and could only send messages through humans. As for the reason why she chose humans, it was not that difficult to understand. The reason why she never returned was because she wanted to unravel the secret of the human legacy. Her target was also the legacy shard of the human. Considering that there might be outstanding witches among the witches who could come into contact with the realm of mind, this clue seemed logical. The more Haxord thought about it, the more he felt that his guess was correct. But the biggest question now was: did Valkyries convince the witch and make her a part of the plan, or was she forced by the enemy to write the letter unwillingly? Honestly speaking, he did not believe that the Nightmare Lord would submit to humans. But the realm of mind was different. Floating endlessly on the sea of magic power and constantly being invaded by other consciousnesses, it was extremely difficult to maintain a clear mind. If someone took advantage of this situation, it was hard to say what the outcome would be. The difference between the two was like heaven and earth. If it was the latter situation, it would at most be a trap. If it was the former, wouldn't it mean that the race was walking on the wrong path? And the mastermind behind all of this was none other than the creator of the deity of gods. Was that why the Nightmare Lord chose to hand the letter to me and not the creator of the deity of gods? Haxord could not help but shiver. He forcefully cut off his train of thought and forbade himself from thinking about this problem. Opening the distortion door, Sky Lord took a step up into the sky. The natural barrier of the human kingdom, the impassable mountain range, appeared like a winding gray line at the edge of the continent. In at most a week, the war would resume. The deity of gods beneath his feet was like a gigantic fortress that moved unswervingly towards the battlefield. In a situation where the rain of fire and branches of fire were powerless, it was hard for him to imagine how the humans were going to resist and stop the race from conquering. This was a war that they were determined to win. But Valkyries believed that the deity of gods was not safe. If saying that divine will was a scam was too far-fetched, then the warning was right before their eyes. He was unwilling to believe that the enemy could pose a threat to such a majestic magic creation. But thinking about it seriously, all of their past failures were built on the basis of impossibility. Furthermore, the warning came from the Nightmare Lord. Even if the letter was a trap, it would not do anything to him. With the deity of gods and silent disaster at the front lines, he only needed to ensure a stable supply for the rear. There was no risk on one side, while there was hidden danger on the other. The choice was obvious. However, Haxord had more to think about. He turned to look towards the north. According to the letter, the legendary source of magic power, the beginning and end of all things, the realm of mind, was at the end of his vision. As long as he found the bottomless land, he could verify the authenticity of the contents of the letter. The ridge of the continent was the crucial logistics line for attacking the humans, so it would not be strange for it to appear anywhere. And while searching for the bottomless land, there was no way he would be affected by the deity of gods. Even if the king were to question him in the future, he would not be unable to defend himself. Perhaps, this was the correct method.